o'clock, I'm going to call this September 13th, 2021 meeting of the Chelmsford Select Board to order. Could you join me in the pledge? I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And just for the record, Board Member Lefebvre is absent this evening. We'll start with our public service announcements. We have Latasha is here to accept the Day of Peace Proclamation. If you want to come forward and Pat will read it.
Okay, this is a proclamation from the town of Chelmsford for the International Day of Peace, which is September 22nd, 2001, sponsored by the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. The Day of Peace event will be on September 25th, 2021. Whereas the issue of peace embraces the deepest hopes of all peoples and remains humanity's guiding inspiration, and whereas in 1981 the United Nations proclaimed the International Day of Peace be devoted to commemorating and strengthening the ideals of peace both within and among all nations and peoples, and whereas the United Nations expanded the observance of the International Day of Peace in 2001 to include the call for a day of global ceasefire and nonviolence, and invited all nations and people to honor a cessation of hostilities for the duration of the day, and whereas the support within our town for the observance of the International Day of Peace affirms a vision of our world at peace and fosters cooperation between individuals, organizations, and nations, and whereas global crises impel all citizens to work toward converting humanity's noblest aspirations for world peace into the practical reality of a culture of peace for future generations. Now, therefore, we, the Select Board of the Town of Chelmsford, do hereby proclaim September 21 as International Day of Peace throughout the Town of Chelmsford and encourage residents, local businesses, educators, community and faith-based organizations, town employees, town boards, and town committees to commemorate in an appropriate manner the International Day of Peace. This may include community service projects, cultural exhibits and performances, a moment of silence, ringing of bells, sharing the universal message, may peace prevail on earth at noon, vigils, religious services in our places of worship, and other education and public awareness activities in order to help establish a global day of peace in our homes, our communities, and between nations. Further, the Chelmsford Select Board supports the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee Day of Peace event on the Town Common on Saturday, September 25th, 2021, and encourage the community to celebrate the Chelmsford Day of Peace with family, friends, and neighbors from 1 to 5 p.m. on this day. Signed as 13th day of September 2021 by the Select Board and sealed by Patricia Durris, the Town Clerk.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And on behalf of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee, I invite all of you, your family, your friends, your neighbors, to please come out. It is going to be a family-friendly event. There will be song, dance, spoken word, arts, and crafts. So it's a great time for us to come together and promote peace in our community. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good luck.
Okay, our next agenda segment is the for public input. Do we have anyone who would like to speak during public input? Okay, seeing none, I'm going to move on to committee vacancies.
Okay, as of today, the following committees have vacancies. The Arts and Technology Education Fund has 1 vacancy. The Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee has 2 vacancies. The CCA Advisory Committee has 1 vacancy. The Center Village Master Plan Implementation Committee has 1 vacancy. The Clean Energy and Sustainability Committee is a new 9-member committee that will be formed possibly at our next meeting. And just a reminder that the deadline for applications for that committee is this Wednesday, September 15th. The Commission on Disabilities has 2 vacancies. The Community Action Program Committee has 2 vacancies. The Council on Aging has 1 permanent member vacancy and 5 associate member vacancies. The Cultural Council has 2 vacancies. The Holiday Decorating Committee has 1 vacancy. The Parade Committee welcomes all applicants. Permanent Building Committee has 1 vacancy. The Public Celebrations Committee has 5 vacancies. The Recycling Committee has 1 vacancy, and the Tree Committee has 2 vacancies. If you're interested in serving on any of these boards or committees, you can fill out an application online, or you can call a town manager's office for more information.
Thank you, Pat. Ken, are you joining us from the Zoom room?
I'm here,
Okay,
but I just figured I'd jump in when needed.
okay.
Thank you.
So I announced that Ken was absent, but he is joined us in the Zoom room. I'm going to have you, Pat, still.
Okay.
Okay, the next item on the agenda is to review the Indigenous Peoples' Day Proclamation. We are going to take no action on that item this evening. It's going to be deferred until our next meeting on September 20th. The Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee would like a little more time to work on a presentation in conjunction with that discussion. So that brings us to licenses. The first one up is the common Vigiller license for the Chelmsford House of Pizza. Do we have anybody here for Chelmsford House of Pizza? You can come up to the podium, sir. We just need your name and address.
Okay, my name is Sarwar Amin, and the business address 14 Chelmsford Street, Chelmsford.
Thank you.
Thank
Does the board have any questions? Is this a new location, or are you moving from your old location?
This is a new starting business.
Is he keeping the old location?
What, Ken?
Is he keeping the old location?
It's a new enterprise. Its name is similar to
Okay.
another one, but it's not.
Oh, it's a totally different
Different one.
Oh.
yeah.
business,
It
Ken.
did used to be a Chelmsford House of Pizza, but it was in Vinyl Square, and it's
Right.
been replaced by something totally different. So,
That's why we're confused, sir. Okay, if we have no questions, I would take a motion.
okay, I'll make a motion that we approve a common victuals license for Chelmsford House of Pizza to be exercised at 14 Chelmsford Street as presented.
I'll second the motion.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor? Aye. Ken?
Aye.
Okay, 5-0. Good luck.
All
Thank
set.
you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Good luck, sir.
And the next one is for a one-day expansion of the entertainment license for the Center Brick House Pizza on October 10th. Do we have anybody here from Brick House? Hello.
Hello, Charlie Mickle, Brickhouse Center Sports Grill, 1 Central Square, Chelmsford. So,
And this is for a special event on that day?
yeah, we did it a couple years ago, and then we've also done it July 3rd, July 5th, that we've gotten a stage and had a band and just expanded our premises. We gated off, put in some extra seating and some extra staff. So, yeah, looking to do it again.
And you have all the inputs from the police,
I
the
do.
fire, and the building
I spoke
inspector?
with the building
Okay.
already, and he advised me to just reconnect with him after our meeting here, so.
Any questions?
It's 1 to 8, Charlie, right? 1 in the afternoon to 8 at night.
Yeah, we're not going into the night, especially with noise and darkness.
Right.
Now, I know on the 4th of July, the one around the 4th of July, we had asked for a police detail.
Yep.
Are you intending to have a police detail?
If needed, and we've talked to them, what's interesting, it got moved last time, and they were contracted to be there, and we didn't see them, so we will contract them again.
Okay.
I mean, I had confirmed with them as well, so,
Uh-huh.
but yeah.
Okay. Well, could the fact that the date shifted, could that have something?
I'm not sure what happened.
Okay.
Okay, we ready for a motion?
Okay, I'll make a motion that we approve the, what is this officially called? The expansion of
Expansion of the entertainment license.
expansion of the entertainment license for Center Brick House Pizza on October 10th, 2021, with a rain date of October 11th, 2021, to be exercised from 1 to 7 p.m. on whichever day. Is that correct? 1 to 8 p.m.
On date.
I'll second the motion.
Have a motion and a second. All those in favor? Aye. Ken?
Aye.
5-0. Thank you.
Thank you very
You're all
much.
set.
Thanks.
Good luck, Charlie.
Thank you.
Okay, and next up is the one-day all alcoholic beverages license for the Armenian Church. Do we have anybody here for that?
No, we had informed them that they
Yeah,
needed
I just wanted to double check.
Okay, I'll make a motion that we approve a one-day all alcohol license for St. Vartanant's Armenian Church for October 13th, 2021.
A motion and a second. All those in favor?
I didn't second it yet.
Oh, I'm sorry. Do we have a second?
Yes, I'll second the motion.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Ken?
Aye.
Okay, 5-0. Okay, next up is the discussion on the licenses for 2022.
Yeah, Madam Chair, as Christina Bruce noted in her memo, we're approaching the renewal for the 2022 calendar year license. And last year, there was an extraordinary period where there was a partial waiver of some of the fees offered and resulting during the pandemic. We've not had any inquiries this year, and we're not aware of others that are being considered at this time, although recognizing it is just after Labor Day and it's time to go. But it does require a considerable amount of work to get these mailings out by in the next month or so. So we're just asking that the board just confirm these fees for the current year. My sense would be that if the board did want to provide fee relief, rather than doing it with the licenses, it's something we could take up under the ARPA monies. And that'd probably be a better venue rather than, speculating and then trying to figure out what would happen at an early date when it's really not on the applicant's radar screen. And it may be something, so that.
How would you structure the ARPA monies, Paul? Just a rebate on fees paid?
Right, yeah, the board could consider it in terms of either partial or some kind of rebate on fees or other aspects of assistance to businesses, license holders.
So fundamentally, with the restaurants up and running now, Christina's just looking for some guidance ahead of time before she goes through the effort of issuing
Exactly.
letters
Yeah, and I
on
think the
whether
other
we
thing
just
is-
hold the fees at the full fee.
Yeah. And I think the other thing is now that we have a year of experience, we do know that the restaurants that were operational and are operational did fare pretty
continue,
well.
yeah.
And so therefore, it doesn't seem to be the sense of them hanging on like they were a year ago when we're in the midst of the pandemic, those stages.
Thoughts?
No, I think as circumstances arise, we can adjust if we need to.
Pat?
Yeah, I'm fine
did, yeah,
with
sure.
what Paul had said. Yeah, we can rebate later if it looks like that's needed or appropriate.
You okay with that, George?
Yes.
Ken?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, great, thank you. We don't need any action, we just wanted to bring it before you.
Yeah, makes sense.
Thank
Okay.
you.
So next up are reports and presentations.
Yeah, Paul McKinley,
Oh, excuse me.
George's excuse.
We're going to let the record show that George Dixon is recusing himself from this topic.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair. Paul McKinley, the licensed site professional for Weston and Sampson Engineers, is on the Zoom call remotely, and he's here to present the update regarding the 54 Richardson Road immediate response action plan regarding addressing the PFAS remediation. So at this point, he has a PowerPoint, which we'll turn it over to him, and we have it displayed here on the screen. Good evening, Paul.
Good evening. So you do have the PowerPoint presented?
Yep.
Perfect. So yes, again, good evening all. My name is Paul McKinley. I'm a licensed site professional with Weston and Sampson, assisting on the assessment and proposed remediation for 54 Richardson Road. So if you could please bump to the next slide. Just a a quick overview of where we are at. Let me just pull up my slides in tandem here. Here we go. So just a quick rundown of where we're at on the assessment and our results. So PFAS, the primary contaminant of concern here that we're dealing with on the 54 Richardson site. Unfortunately, our last round of data during June 2021 for groundwater detected PFAS in the majority of the wells out on the site. In fact, 15 of the 21 monitoring wells we have are exceeding the Mass DEP threshold for the PFAS compounds, and this is a summation of 6 target compounds. The standard is 20 parts per trillion, and again, 15 of the 21 wells have exceeded the highest concentration. And next slide, we'll have a map of this. We'll go over it sort of graphically in a second here. But the monitoring well MW1, this was one of the original existing monitoring wells on the site. Unfortunately, the concentrations have been increasing steadily in all of our sampling rounds to date. Started in the hundreds range, and now it represents the site maximum of 952 parts per trillion during the June 2021 sampling event. So this is a maximum, and we've seen a steady increase in concentrations in that well. The suspected primary source, and we're gleaning this from the distribution of contaminants, site history, and many other sources of information, appears to be in proximity to the 8-bay garage structure. There is another secondary hotspot, we would term it, elevated concentration in groundwater we detected over in the dog park at well WSMW104. It was about in the 500 parts per trillion range, but in the last sampling round, it actually decreased a little bit, but still we're considering this as potentially another potential source area of this PFAS. As far as investigating, and we have installed 21 monitoring wells to date. We have pressure transducers and been doing a fairly robust hydrogeologic survey, a study of how groundwater and subsequently the contaminant movement is occurring out there. We did. I think last time I was on with the select board, we decided to do a geophysical survey, which was completed of the entire site, identified a number of anomalies. We want to investigate those. It turns out approximately 50 drums were detected, found during subsequent test pitting and removed from the site. So we look at those as potential sources, as is a lot of the other debris that was removed. PFAS could be adhering to any of this, anthropogenic man-made materials that are out there, could represent a potential source, but 50 drums removed obviously was a big step forward, as was the identification of the oil water separator. Mass DEP had asked us to look at potential poison sources and discharge from the floor drain. We still consider a potential source of PFAS on the site, but there was an oil water separator we discovered and we removed. So remediation has been ongoing, and potential source investigation and removal has occurred to date, and we will continue to do so. Next slide, please.
Paul, before you go to the next slide, could you
Sure.
say a little bit more about the evaluation of other off-site potential sources?
Sure. So, Weston & Sampson has been working on PFAS and in the area, and one of the things we're looking at is there seems to be a regional source of PFAS in the range of about 17 parts per trillion to about 21, I think is the range, just recalling off the top of my head. And this is in site surface water and sort of I don't want to say a background, but a pervasive concentration that's in the area. So one of the things we've done is we actually installed piezometers, surface water piezometers in the stream for Cold Streams Brook, which circumnavigates the site and also travels onto the North Chelmsford Water District property. And we have yet to sample surface water at those locations, but that sort of, regional impacts of these, lower level, and I say lower level, they're really, at or around the Massachusetts standard for PFAS, but we are looking at those regional impacts and how those may affect, the site and the North Chelmsford Water District. But that being said, there also is clearly some elevated levels on the site as well, which, as we'll get to, we're proposing to do some remediation on as well to address those point sources on the site.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Quick question. Before, I'm trying to remember this, I don't have my notes in front of me. We scanned the dog park too, correct?
We did.
Okay, and there was nothing that came up underneath there?
No, the dog park certainly had some drums and other debris that was removed from the dog park as well. So, there's certainly some potential sources on the dog park which could be generating that exceedance that we saw in that hotspot around the MW 104 area. So certainly, I think it's safe to say that there was debris and anomalies across the entire site, and we did several days of excavation to address those anomalies, and where we found a potential suspected source, it was removed. So jumping into this is just a graphic depiction of the concentrations we're detecting across the site. If you look at the north side of the 8-bay garage structure, you'll see MW1. It's the concentration in the well that's highlighted in red, or I'm sorry, the well symbol is red, and you can see the MW1 952 parts per trillion, as I stated previously. And the next highest concentration, and this corresponds to our last sampling round, is this WS MW102S, which is on Richardson Road, actually to the west of the 8-bay garage structure. So between those points are the highest concentrations we're detecting on site, and which leads us, as a primary indicator of where we think a potential source of PFAS is on the site. And as we move forward through this PowerPoint, you'll see that our remedial efforts will be focusing on this elevated area on the site. Move on to the next slide. So remedial options evaluation. We've been, since we last met, we've been exploring basically every avenue. Unfortunately, PFAS is a newer issue that's been identified. I'm sure a lot of you have seen it in the news. They call it forever chemicals, but we are it is a newer contaminant, and so the remedial options are a little bit limited. We've been exploring them all, and as we're doing that remedial evaluation, options evaluation, we look at what we're trying to accomplish here and some of the site conditions which would limit or enhance our ability to implement some remedial options. So as I listed here, and I stated before, the 8-bay garage structure is, in or around that structure, we think may have been a potential source of PFAS, but the presence of the building, limits our ability to work in and around it. Needless to say, tearing down the building is something we wanted to avoid. Protect the North Chelmsford Water District wells is really, I actually probably should have put this first. This is our number one driving factor for our selection of the remedial options. This is a sensitive receptor, and we're looking at protecting that. The horizontal hydraulic connectivity and the subsurface geologic aquifer out there, unfortunately it's extremely permeable, which is why the North Chelmsford Water District uses it for water supply. But it also, on the flip side, allows us to a variety of remedial options, because the aquifer is so permeable and water moves so fast through there. So it's a little bit of a double-edged sword here for us with the high conductivity. And as I said before, there's limited and expensive PFAS treatment options, such as soil is hundreds of dollars a ton to remove and dispose of, and there's really no remedial or disposal options anywhere in New England. Cost is obviously, for the town, is something that we've been spending a lot of time looking at the most cost-effective and the cost-effective and effective option. I guess that's obviously there's a cost to this, but we want to make sure it's effective. And then the time and duration of implementation. Given that there's impacts at the North Chelmsford water supply wells, we want to obviously do something in a timely fashion as quick as we can. All of this needs to go into a remedial plan that's due in about a month. On October 11th. This is an interim deadline established by Mass DEP. Can we move on to the next slide, please? Unless there's any questions?
Maybe you can address this as you go through the options, but the question I'm left with is, at what point in time and dollars spent do we decide if we have to excavate the building footprint?
Yeah, I think as I go through the remedial options, maybe it'll become clearer, but I feel like there are certainly remedial options that can address the plume and the impacts to North Chelmsford Water District, at least initially, without having to compromise the building or the site use. I know it's a DPW facility and temporary location of fire operations, so like to maintain those. I would imagine that the town is looking to maintain those while implementing our remedial strategy. But I feel like as we've evaluated the remedial options that we can work in and around the building with some of these options without compromising the structure and having to tear it down.
Okay.
If you'd please bump to the next slide.
I'm on remedial option 1. Is that where you want to be?
Yes, please. So this is this is the first remedial option, and I should say that we've actually evaluated numerous remedial options. I didn't list them here, but for instance, soil excavation, and there are certainly a few remedial options we can look at, and we did explore. But in situ treatment is one that pretty quickly rose to the surface, and for reasons that you had just asked. We can work in and around the building with this. And what it constitutes is basically injecting a product into the subsurface that will render the PFAS or will absorb the PFAS preferentially to stop the migration. So there are several products and vendors out there. I don't want to name them specifically here, but the theory would be to use the products, and there's several from several different vendors, and we've sort of explored them and costed them out. But what we would do is actually we would treat the source area and also create what's called a barrier wall along Richardson Road. So as groundwater migrates through this barrier, it would take the PFAS out of the groundwater column, essentially preferentially adhere the PFAS to the product that's being injected and stop it from migrating. So the advantages is proven technology. All these products are primarily carbon. So North Chelmsford Water District is using carbon to treat water before it goes out to customers now. Carbon is something that's been used for decades and decades. It's if you have a Brita water filter, it's essentially a carbon filter as well. So it's a proven technology. It's easy to apply. We would use what's called direct push technology, but it would involve hundreds of points, as it's alludes to here. That it's probably about a 30-day or a month application to actually advance the points and pump it into the ground. But once it's in, it does its work, and there may be need to do additional injections depending on the concentration and longevity of the product. But it is at least initially a one-time application to hopefully decrease the concentrations to meet the standards and protect the North Chelmsford Water District. The disadvantages, and one of the things we're looking at with, and this is the difference between some of the products, is a lot of times what it does is it adheres or binds the PFAS to this product, such as carbon, but that PFAS is still present in the subsurface. So although it's not moving or migrating, it's still present, and that mass is still in the subsurface. So that's one of the disadvantages. Some of the products may enhance bioremediation and it may break down the PFAS, but that's a newer technology and doesn't quite have the track record that some of the other products do. So certainly there's advantages and disadvantages to this option. If you actually bump to the next slide, I can show you what that would look like.
So, Paul, I think you just answered my question, but what you're saying is this barrier wall would stop the migration. It's not going to reduce the amount of PFAS.
That's yeah. So it does adhere it and sort of render it like, for lack of a better term, like inert. It binds to the whatever the product is, primarily a carbon. Mm-hmm. It adheres to that and stops it from migrating and really locks it in place. So it wouldn't continue to migrate over to the North Chelmsford Water District. And of course, there's an attenuation here. It's not a 100 to 0% some game here. It's we reject product, and this is where the cost comes in. It's sort of how much product on over how many points and how much do we inject. And the more product, obviously, the better it comes, but it's more expensive. So in looking at this at the figure that's up, if you look at the area, around the 8-bay garage structure, the calculated out is about 23,000 square feet. We would be injecting it from the top of the water table, which is about 5 feet, down to about 20 feet below grade, where we think the source area may be. So it would render or treat impacts in both where we think is the source area, but as you see along the line along Richardson Road there, we would also create this barrier wall. So it's really a two-pronged approach. You're trying to treat the source or bind the PFAS in the source area to stop it from migrating, and then also creating this barrier wall to protect the receptors, the North Chelmsford Water District, as groundwater is migrating and moving off the site, try and create this curtain so as groundwater passes through it, again, it's pulling the PFAS out before it migrates across the street to North Chelmsford Water District.
How long is a barrier like that effective?
So it depends on, again, multiple products, but the manufacturers are saying years and years, and there's slight differences in the performance standard, but at least I guess a tenfold reduction, if not more. So the goal here again is to reduce the concentrations, so as it migrates towards the primary receptor here, the North Chelmsford Water District, we're significantly reducing the concentration. So the public water supply wells are not having the impacts that they are currently.
Paul, and another question, if you're injecting this into the ground 5 feet down to 20 feet down to build a wall, and this chemical or whatever it is absorbs PFAS, and then they get locked in there, let's say in 20 years, could you then trench and dig this stuff up and grab those stuck PFAS out of there? Is there potential for that?
Yes, absolutely. That's one of the things the manufacturer sort of mentioned as these products and this application for PFAS, again, relatively new, contaminant and new remedial options, but they're looking at this as potentially you might have to excavate and remove this, I guess, impacted product that's in the ground. You might need to remove it at some stage, which would be an additional cost. So again, we're looking at that as a factor in our evaluation when we're looking at the remedial options. We look at it and think that it could be a very effective and good remedial option, but there certainly are disadvantages as well in the evaluation. And as I mentioned before, we would do one injection here to start, and hopefully, significantly reduce the impacts that are out there. But there's no guarantees that additional injections may be required. They very well may. And in other areas of the site. So as you've seen here, this would be targeting what we think is the primary source on the site, but is not addressing the dog park area up to the north.
Quick question. If the building wasn't there, what would the action be in that case?
I think the building in this case with this kind of application, and I will say this is one of the, in situ treatment is a very, very common remedial option even for non-PFAS contaminants. And the building, the presence of the building shouldn't limit this type of remedial approach. We can inject in the building. We did a soil boring program inside the structure, and similarly we use the exact same kind of drilling apparatus to get at it. I will say the presence of the building, I think I mentioned this before, could hinder if we had identified a smoking gun, for lack of a better term, or a source area in soil above the water table in the building, we would be looking to excavate it out, but that's a remedial option. We just didn't see those direct soil impacts in the structure that would warrant an excavation program and compromising the structure itself.
You want to try again?
That I appreciate the response, but what I'm really wondering is if the building was not there, would you be going into a different process or a different plan to mitigate it from migrating across the street while potentially excavating the site as opposed to the injection, et cetera? In other words, would you be putting in the curtain or the wall and excavating versus doing all the injections and following that process?
Oh, it's an excellent question, and it is a factor in our evaluation that there is a building present. But I will say that, that the remedial approaches that we're evaluating, and given our, we've been at this now for, I guess since, November-ish or so, less than a year in evaluating, and I think I've talked about the timelines. We've really expedited our assessment, and we're expediting our remediation. And so we look at this remediation, we're doing this under what's called an immediate response action for DEP. So we want to do something, quickly, yet we want it to be effective and hopefully address the long-term options. So I would say that the options that we're looking at here is a more of an immediate remediation to address the effects in the receptors, the North Chelmsford Water District wells. And if for instance we do identify that there is a continuing source and maybe it is in the building, that could be a potential down the road, is to look at doing excavation and the presence of the building may be an impediment, but at this initial remediation step that we're proposing, I don't think the presence of the building is really going to affect the remedial options that we zeroed in on through our entire evaluation.
So let me try. So Paul, if you're saying if the building were not there, you would recommend the same approach?
If at this initial stage, yes, at this initial stage with the information that we have, I don't think that we would be looking to dig soil, in the footprint of the building.
Paul, let's say the October date wasn't staring you in the face either, right? Okay, because I think that's affecting the response that we're trying to achieve here. If that date wasn't looming, which is causing you to do the injections to make sure that we can mitigate and stop this, if that wasn't looming and the building wasn't there, how would you approach this?
We would approach it in the same way. Maybe that's the easiest way to answer your question, is after evaluation of all the remedial options, these are the two best ones that we've identified, and the presence of the building isn't really affecting either of these options.
Okay. Thank you.
Was that concise enough? I know I was.
Yes, it was.
I wasn't hitting the target there that you're asking for, so hopefully that.
Appreciate it. No, well, you did mention the building as being what looked like an impediment to what you were trying to do, and I just wanted to dive into that a little bit deeper. That's all.
Yep. No, fair enough. So I think you can see some of these. Just to note on this figure here, with the in situ remedial approach, we are talking hundreds of injection points. There are, a lot of product that we'd be injecting, and of course that comes with a cost. So that's and whatever. Again, there are multiple products. We've been looking at them. They have slight variations, but again, one of the significant problems is that mass removal that we've been looking at, and how to get a permanent solution here. We don't want to. To expand a little bit on my answer, we are looking to do this quickly to address the receptor, but we also want to be mindful and try and address the root cause of the problem here. And that's why when you look at this figure, we're proposing to really do two things here, is to try and treat the source area, the primary source area around the building, but also with the curtain wall, protect the receptors of the North Chelmsford Water District wells.
And you keep mentioning costs. What do you think the order of magnitude is?
Yeah, from multiple vendors, the costs have been fairly similar. So a approach like this, which is a targeted approach, was about $600,000. Okay. And again, there's no guarantee that multiple events may be needed here. So that's certainly a factor in the evaluation looking at it. But in talking with the vendors, they are confident that there will be a sort of order of magnitude reduction over several years. But beyond that, that's where their data starts tailing off, and they're not willing to make warranties beyond that. So.
And assuming that the initial barrier wall is deemed effective, how often are you testing after that to validate the integrity of the wall?
Absolutely. So on either of the remedial options, there certainly will be a testing component. So here, if we were to move forward with remedial option number one and we were injecting product into the subsurface, there are several steps. Like, first of all, we would need approval from Mass DEP to do so, like very specific approval. And I have touched base with DEP, and they would certainly be agreeable to any of these remedial options. But we would have to monitor, and thankfully we have some wells and some sentinel wells in place. These 113 114Ds and S's and 114Ds and S's. And these are in between the 54 Richardson Road site and the Bomeo wells on the North Chelmsford Water District property. So we would have to monitor these wells periodically, so it'd be more frequently to start with, and then once we have a body of data indicating that the wells aren't being adversely affected by our remediation, then we'd be able to tail off the monitoring frequency. But it would be on the order of weeks to months, sampling initially and then tailing off to quarterly to track the progress of the remediation.
Is there any way you would stage the injections in the barrier in a way that while you were doing the remediation, you were also picking up data to suggest maybe where it's coming from, how it's migrating, etc.? Or is it just one shot?
Yeah, it's really this one is a one shot. We've spent the last months getting our well network in place. We've done several rounds of drilling and sort of targeted and narrowed down where we think the hottest, the most impacted area of the site is. And so at this stage, we've got enough data here to say, all right, here are where the impacts are in groundwater. Let's target those with a remedial approach. So this is the first option, and I have another one here to present to you as well tonight. To run through. So really this would be a one snapshot. We would go out there, do the injections, and then monitor the progress. And again, from all indications, multiple vendors have products that any one of them would be suitable. And I think we've identified, if we were going to go with this remedial approach, a preferred vendor which might actually be able to break down some of the compounds rather than just rendering it inert or binding to the injected product. So there are multiple options out there, but I will say that in obtaining costs from several vendors, they were very, very, very similar. And with that, if we're maybe move on to the second option. Yep. So the second option is more of a traditional pump, treat, and re-inject. So in looking at this more traditional technology, what you'd be doing here is putting in extraction wells, pumping it out, treating the water with traditional carbon, or there's resin chambers, or there's certainly as technology and new techniques evolve, we could change the treatment as there are certainly indications that new technologies may be coming online, which may be more cost effective than granular activated carbon or resin treatment to treat the extracted groundwater. So in this option, again, we would be installing extraction wells, pumping water out of the subsurface. Again, I mentioned before, the aquifer here that we're dealing with is extremely permeable, so it would allow us to pump and actually generate a large radius of influence and create what we would term as hydraulic control and stop both the contaminants from migrating offsite, but also removing the impacted groundwater, treating it, and then re-injecting it. So if you actually moved on to the next slide, I can just sort of graphically show you what that looks like. And as you see here, with an extraction well close to MW1 and MW2 on the north sort of, what is that, the northeast corner of the 8-bay garage, put an extraction well, and we would remove that water, we would treat it, and then re-inject it. And you can see here, there's really two trenches that we may look at, a recharge trench on the upgrading side, which when you're re-injecting clean water there, you're basically, for lack of a better term, maybe flushing clean water through the system. But on the downgrading side, on Richardson Road, we've depicted here another recharge gallery, and that's where we would actually be injecting clean water as it migrates offsite to help dilute anything in the plume that is migrating offsite and that we weren't able to capture. I will say this is a preliminary rendering, and we are looking at actually, our hydrologist looking at if multiple wells were used, one maybe even closer to Richardson Road as a backup. I don't think it would incrementally increase costs too much, but may add additional layers of protection to this option, which again is utilizing proven technology, create hydraulic control, protect the receptors, and address the source at the same time. So this option as well has many advantages. Disadvantages: it would operate for long period of time. We would have to install additional extraction wells, injection trenches, and it would operate for a matter of years. It could be 10 years or more of operation, but I will say the costs, as we're evaluating this even over multiple years, does appear to be lower. So I said 600,000 for the injections, and looking to be about 400,000 or 500,000 even for 10 years of operation for this option. So it has a little bit more of a cost effective, and it's usually utilizing proven technology. And so that's the second option.
400 to 500K over the 10 years.
That's what it's looking like.
And so what, if you're actually removing the PFAS, why would that be a disadvantage? Is it just because
not.
it's more complicated?
It's more complicated. You're pumping water. There's certainly operation and maintenance. We'd have to typically on a system that pumps groundwater, you'd have a technician out every 2 weeks to do operation and maintenance on the system, make sure it's operating properly. It obviously requires electric and treatment shed and carbon vessels. Carbon will need to be rebedded. We don't have to actually dispose of the carbon. You can oftentimes regenerate it and reuse it, which is nice. But this option actually does have many advantages. Again, the treatment technology with granulated activated carbon or resin may change in the future, and this would allow us flexibility to take advantage of that if a more cost-effective treatment technology does come available. We can switch it out and use that for this pumping system. And we can add additional wells, or we can even increase the pumping rate too. If we find that our initial projections on this radius of influence as we're pumping proves to be, maybe the assumptions were a little off, we can always increase the pumping rate or add additional wells here to basically tweak this remedial option as we go to meet our objectives. So as you may have gleaned, we're leaning towards actually option number 2 as our formal recommendation, which we should be providing to you shortly with potential anticipated costs.
Are seasonal changes in the water table or any of those things a concern?
Nope. And one of the things we're looking at, we have had what's called pressure transducers in some of these wells, recording pumping rates and water table elevations. And we've been looking at the effect of the Bomia wells on like the hydrogeology of the site itself, and we are seeing some effects of the pumping for the North Chelmsford Water District wells in our wells. So that's something that we would need to essentially, for lack of a better term, overcome. But the distance that we're pumping versus the distance to the Bomia wells is, it's an order of magnitude longer to the Bomia wells. We should be able to overcome that and create the hydraulic containment that we're looking for. And again, as you see this depiction here, right now our hydrologists are really adding in and modeling what another extraction well or 2 may look like. We feel like adding another extraction point or 2 may, add some belts and suspenders and not incrementally increase the cost as much. So look for that very likely in our final recommendation.
Paul, if you're still seeing increased levels of PFAS in that area and we haven't nailed the source yet, is there a timeline that, we should and we can start these remediation efforts, but if we haven't identified the source to try to cap the rate of escalation of PFAS, how do we catch up with it?
It's a great question. This is one of the things we've been struggling with, and certainly as we provide information to these vendors to model out, how much product we would have to, for remedial option number 1, how much of their product do we need to inject? Well, that's a function of concentration. So our concentrations are still increasing. So, what do we use as an assumption? Do we think we're at the maximum concentration? Is it likely to still increase? So this is those kind of variables again are something that, as we look at remedial option 2, that gives us the flexibility to address, even if the concentrations were increasing, we could adjust, or the system would be flexible enough so we could address those the increasing concentrations. Whereas the injections, I think, as I said before, it's a snapshot. We're making an assumption. Here's the concentration. Here's how much product they need to inject, so they'll inject it, and then we, watch the effect here, and if our assumptions that, you know, the PFAS, the concentrations that we gave them, we weren't giving them the maximum, maybe there's more mass of this contaminant in the subsurface, then the amount of product that we inject in the remedial option number 1 might not be quite correct. So that's, you know, one of the advantages of remedial option 2 is it gives us the flexibility. If the site conditions are changing, we could, you know, have the flexibility to address that.
Are there any similar examples where option 1 was used effectively?
So with one vendor, so I'll say one vendor, and I'm just being careful not to name names here, but one vendor has an extensive track record of using a product for a similar application. Another vendor, which has a little more promise in potentially removing some of the massive PFAS, it's a new technology, and they've only had 3 sort of case studies with it. So a little bit of angst there that it doesn't have, you know, multiple years of proven track record. It's a newer technology, and, you know. And again, in our evaluation, looking at something that doesn't quite have such a long track record versus pump and treat, which is, you know, people have been using that for decades and decades. You know, part of our recommendation is based on that.
Okay.
Any other questions from the board? Paul, do you have any other questions, comments?
What happens basically over the next few weeks is I think the concluding question is where do we go from here until the October 11th deadline to file the report?
So look for us. I guess we're designing out the whole of remedial option 2 so that we can give you a cost as well. But again, we're leaning towards remedial option number 2, and with that, we'll give you a formal recommendation with costs and what that'll look like in the next week or so. And then once we have that to you, hopefully you can make a decision and we can move forward.
And then the filing that gets submitted on by October 11th, what is that like? Is that something you share with the board? We're trying to make sure that all our ducks in a row so that we meet that deadline.
Sure. So the October 11th is a deadline to submit what's called a revised immediate response action plan, which will have this remediation component in it. So we'll draft a report. We've done several IRA plans previously. We share them with Steve, but certainly Steve can share with the board. We're all available to review it. But our recommendation is basically going to give you the remedial option that get plugged into that report. So to answer your question, Paul, you're absolutely. The report gets drafted, and we circulate to whoever from the town of Chelmsford would like to review it. Certainly can welcome to any and all comments. And then once we have what we deemed as a final report, we then submit that electronically to Mass DEP. That's if all goes well electronically, that's about a 5-minute process to get that electronically submitted.
The October 11th is Columbus Day, so anyway, but this board will be meeting every Monday night from now through October 4th, which is the Monday before Columbus Day. So I guess what you're saying is you'll come back before this board prior to that to review the recommended option as well as the filing? Is that the best way to describe it? Up until perhaps maybe October 4th when we're right on the cusp of that?
Can certainly come back in front of the board and discuss it. I guess I was envisioning a more detailed written evaluation for review, but certainly we can do it
Either way.
as a public meeting in front of the board as well.
Well, if we had an opportunity to read it first.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. You get it out to, yeah,
then
that's
meet
what I'm saying.
to
Then
discuss
meet,
additional
yeah,
questions, and I
exactly.
think Paul's trying to get at what those dates would look like.
Yeah. Perhaps in 2 weeks, because you're saying you'll probably have
2
this
weeks,
thing wrapped
yeah.
up in a week. So perhaps if you could give us materials, let's say within 10 days from now, middle of next week, and then board could review it, and then come here on the 26th.
Or the 4th.
24th, I'm sorry, I got my dates, and then
27th.
27th, and then basically, from there, we could then see if we need to see you again on the 4th. If not, then we're done. We just get that submitted in a timely manner.
Yeah, those doubts sound reasonable. We absolutely.
Okay.
Does the North Chelmsford Water District have any input? Bruce, could you just give us your name and for the record?
Yep, Bruce Harper, the superintendent for the North Chelmsford Water District. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to, if I could step aside and have Jonathan O'Brien, he's the LSP for the North Chelmsford Water District. He could talk to the board, if that's permissible.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, Jonathan, you want to step up?
Yeah, good evening, everyone. I apologize for any background noise you may hear.
Jonathan, I need your name, and I know Bruce said you're the LSP, but are you an employee of the Water District or somewhere else?
Yeah, so my name is Jonathan O'Brien, and I work for Conoco Engineers and Scientists. And so, yeah, again, just apologize for any background noise here. I'm at my daughter's archery practice tonight and trying to find a spot where there's low noise. But I had an opportunity earlier today to take a look at the information, Paul, that you sent over. And I just had one question, and you sort of highlighted on it perhaps earlier when you spoke about the pressure transducers that you had installed in the monitoring wells. And I was wondering if, because it appears that the pump and treat system that has been designed doesn't necessarily factor in the dog park area. And I'm wondering if that's perhaps because you didn't see a deflection in the water table, using the pressure transducers that you saw, at the DPW property, and or if there's another reason for that. I just wanted to hear about that, if you don't mind.
Of course, I muted myself. So, yeah, absolutely. So, in looking at the hydro data that we've collected, it looks like the flow direction from the park doesn't is a slightly oblique, I suppose, to the Bomia wells. So it looks like the impacts and the flow direction, we feel from the data, it appears that the plume is originating and migrating from around the 8-bay garage structure versus from the dog park area. And the dog park area, the concentrations over there are fluctuating. And I will say that the other advantage, and I think I missed this in our discussion, but the capture zone with the pump and treat option will actually, from our calculations, will encompass the dog park area. So one of the reasons that we're leaning towards option number 2 is that the radius of influence from the pumping, given the hydraulic conditions, will actually capture and address this suspected source over in the dog park. Versus the remedial option number 1, we would have to do significantly more injections over in the dog park and extend the barrier wall and the curtain, which would lead to significantly more cost. So I guess that was one of the deciding factors for us leaning towards remedial option number 2, is that we feel that pump and treat, and this is where we may add another well or two, but the pump and treat option should capture and address potential sources over in the dog park.
Okay, yeah, thanks, that's great. And then the other thing I noticed, well, I haven't had a chance to review the soil analytical data yet, but I know you mentioned, based on the data you have so far, it appears that there is, if not a source area, at least the concentrations seem to be higher around the garage area that you referred to. And I know, challenges of, managing PFAS contaminated soil off-site are very, very burdensome. But was there any evaluation of potential, excavation of areas and maybe doing some ex situ remediation of that soil on site somewhere, or anything like that?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. We did evaluate soil. In fact, we did a boring program in and around that structure. We actually went inside and did numerous borings. I think we collected 11 or 12 soil samples from in the footprint of the building and immediately adjacent. And there were a few exceedances of Massachusetts standards in soil. So we had a couple detects detections above standards in and around the building. And interestingly enough, the soil sample that we collected from MW 104 over in the dog park also had an exceedance. So there certainly were soil exceedance, but when we looked and tried to correlate or identify, is that a potential source area, it just didn't pan out with, I guess identifying a smoking gun, if you will. If there was an area that looked like it was a clear source of these impacts, obviously, directly addressing it with soil excavation was something that we looked at, and we did. Again, we collected significant amount of data and went drilling inside the building, and I did get that data request. I'm happy to share that information with you, and we can review it. But it wasn't. I guess we didn't see the smoking gun there that would warrant, soil excavation, tearing up the garage floor and disposing of that soil. And as you know, it gets very, very pricey to do so. So that was part of our evaluation, certainly.
Yeah. Okay. But no, I think in general, and I speak for Bruce that, I think the pump and treat option, I think would be very advantageous in terms of, controlling that dissolve phase plume and protecting the North Chelmsford Water District wells. So I think that's a good option.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. So,
So, Bruce, I'll give the mic back to you. If you want to add anything else?
I'm all set, thank you.
okay. Thank you, Bruce and Jonathan. Yeah. So I just want to make sure that the board is aligned. Are we all prefer and we're all okay with Paul detailing out option 2?
Seems like the best option. I think it's most flexible and.
I'm on board with that.
Yep.
Ken? Ken is muted, but. Okay. Anybody have anything else for Paul before we let him go?
Sorry.
All right, we'll see you.
I'm here, Madam Chair.
I'm sorry.
I'm on board with that option too.
Okay. Thanks very much, Paul.
All right, we'll see you in 2 weeks.
See you then. Thank you very
Okay,
much.
Take care. Okay, Paul.
I'm
Next.
gonna go get George.
Oh, yes.
Call you him.
I've been thinking about that the whole time.
I don't forget George.
Okay, so
Last Wednesday, you submitted the wastewater feasibility analysis report. It's obviously very extensive. I guess what we'd like you to do this evening is to sort of highlight the report, your findings, and then the board can discuss sort of next steps from here. So with that, I'll turn the microphone over to you, John, and we'll go from there. Virginia does have the report online if there's a page or pages you want to reference as you're going through your analysis.
Hey, very good, thank you. As Paul said, my name is John Potts. I'm a senior project manager with Weston and Sampson Engineers. And as Paul said, we completed the report late Wednesday. It's the wastewater capacity alternative and feasibility analysis. I had a 2-hour presentation for him, but I'll see if I can whittle it down to a nice little short one for you guys. I'm only kidding. I'm going to focus on, you don't have to turn to it, but in the reports, I'm going to focus on the summary and conclusions on pages 33 and 34. And I'm going to supplement it with information as we go along. It's actually before those figures. It's, there you go. That's what I'm going to focus on, and like I said, I have supplemental information as we go along. This report started basically back in August 2020. We submitted another report to the town of Chelmsford that started to look at wastewater flows and looked at the Katrina Road pump station. And at that time, we started to notice a trend of that the flows that, with approved developments that are in Chelmsford and potential developments, that Chelmsford itself was starting to approach its wastewater capacity limit in accordance with their intermunicipal agreement with Lowell and the Duck Island wastewater treatment plant. So that led into us performing this report of looking at capacity alternatives and looking at feasibility analysis. The report itself is basically broken down into 4 sections, and I'm going to highlight each of those 4 sections, and I'm going to leave it to you, but I can stop at the end of each component, and if there's any questions about that before we move on to the next one. Does that work for you guys?
Yep, that's fine.
The scope and goals of the project was to start off by looking at the wastewater flows at the Duck Island treatment plant itself, and then to look at the wastewater flows in Chelmsford itself, and then look at options of reducing those wastewater flows by the removal of infiltration and inflow, or II. I'll refer to as II through most of the remainder of the presentation. And then we wanted to look at options of gaining capacity through the Lowell Regional Wastewater Utility and the plant itself, and also the tributary towns that all flow to the Duck Island. And then the last component we looked at was to identify the potential of creating an in-town solution in North Chelmsford up at the Southwell Field pump station area itself. So in starting with the wastewater flows to Lowell, in September 2019, a draft permit for the discharge was issued that had for the plant. It was appealed by Lowell and supported by the tributary towns. And at the appeal, they were looking for an increase in the discharge. Currently, the discharge is 32 million gallons per day, is what the treatment plant in Lowell can discharge. The appeal was denied, and the permit itself went into effect on December 1st, 2019. Now, of that 32 million gallons per day, Chelmsford's share is 3.01 million gallons per day, or 9.4%. We continued to look at the wastewater flows from the plant for the last 5 fiscal years. And over those 5 years, the average flow was approximately 28.5 million gallons per day, which was below the 32. However, in fiscal year 19, the average at the plant did exceed with a total of 33.6 million gallons per day. We continue to look at the communities that all discharge to Lowell itself, which are Chelmsford, Dracut, Tingsboro, Tewksbury, and Lowell. And all of the communities are within their limits. Only Lowell has exceeded their allocated capacity in fiscal year 18 and fiscal year 19. They're around 22 million gallons per day and 25 million gallons per day, and they're only allowed at 21 million gallons a day. Chelmsford and Dracut are both approaching their limits, as I've said, and the only community right now that seems to have some capacity is Tewksbury, and I'm going to talk about Tewksbury a little bit later. And the question that comes down to Chelmsford is what happens to Chelmsford if Lowell exceeds the plant, and does the EPA and Mass DEP issue a fine to the treatment plant? We researched that, and everything that we found so far is that both the EPA and the DEP value the environment more than they value money. And despite the discharge limits being exceeded, there has never been any enforcement or fine levied by the EPA or DEP on Lowell for exceeding their treatment. So basically, that was our analysis of the first part. So if anybody had any questions on the Lowell flows.
So the summary is they won't increase the capacity of the plant, but on the other hand, they don't take any action when the capacity is exceeded.
That's correct.
I just want to make sure I understood it for.
Nope, that's exactly the case.
Okay.
At the time of the appeal, they did ask for it, and again, I'm going to get into it in the third section about what Lowell is attempting to do to still try and increase their capacity. So for the same fiscal year, moving into the Chelmsford component, we looked at the same fiscal years of the last 5 years of fiscal year 2017 through fiscal year 2021 to look at Chelmsford flows. The most important thing about the Chelmsford flows to say is right now is Chelmsford has never exceeded the 3.01 million gallons per day allowance. That, we'll just repeat, it has never been exceeded. Now, part of the 3.01 has been allocated to Tingsboro, so Chelmsford's actual limit itself is 2.66 million gallons a day, and Tingsboro has 0.35 million gallons a day. Right now, they are well below that. I'm looking at the last 5 fiscal years. The rolling average, Chelmsford has exceeded their 2.66 for from December 2018 through November 2019. It was exceeded every month, with the highest being around 2.73 million gallons a day in March of 2019. But by the end of fiscal year 21, it had dropped down to 2.42 million gallons per day. So I think it supports what we found in the earlier report that, yes, Chelmsford is approaching their 2.66 million gallons a day capacity. So going back to 2018, we conducted a flow metering report where we put in 35 meters throughout the town and measured the flows between March and July, collected the data, and created estimates of infiltration and inflow in the system. Now, for those who don't know, infiltration is basically groundwater that gets into the pipes and manholes, typically during high groundwater seasons, which are the spring between March and May. Inflow itself is usually direct connections that are storm related, and it's the storm flows that get into the wastewater system and take up the capacity. When at the end of the flow metering report, we created a 10-year multi-project annual investigation plan to help identify and reduce II. The town has been very proactive, which is for a system that is as new as Chelmsford. You guys are very proactive and very ahead of other towns in doing what you guys are doing by using your own equipment and your own staff to investigate infiltration itself. Now, according to Mass DEP guidelines, infiltration is not excessive in Chelmsford. They have a standard that all the metered areas, there were 35 metered areas looked at individually, none of them exceeded the typical standard that would consider it excessive. However, infiltration is still present in the system, and going after that infiltration, and which is a longer process, it's more of a marathon than a sprint, finding that infiltration can create capacity in your system. Inflow, on the other hand, like I said, is storm related, is a little more difficult to find. The likeliest culprit for that is private sump pumps that are connected, that homeowners will flip on when their basement floods and start pumping into the system during that. And so it's very clear that storm events do have a level of impact on the town's sewer system, as evidenced this past July, which was probably the rainiest July in a long time, if not the rainiest ever. From the previous July, there was a 15% increase in the flows from the previous year. That is not uncommon. That has happened before. I went back and looked at the flows in July for the last 5 fiscal years, and there was a similar increase between 2017 and 2018. So while it was a big jump, it's not an uncommon jump for what you've seen over the past few years, but it does again indicate that storm-related inflow is taking up capacity in your system. The challenge is identifying those is finding them in the houses and getting the homeowner to remove them. And the best approach that the town, I think, can take for that is to continuously hammer home the approach to the homeowners of letting them know how bad that can take up the space, of how it's impacting the town sewer system and its ability to allow more flows into the system, in particular with the sewer moratorium in place. And by establishing a public outreach program and publishing information on the website, it's something just to consider through the next steps, is to possibly create an amnesty program for the homeowner that comes forward and says, okay, I'll remove my sump pump, but and then maybe consider a cost-sharing program to help that homeowner for getting the water away from his house and direct it to the storm drain. This is all stuff that we can continue to explore.
Paul, did you want to say something?
No, I just wonder what the alternative is.
Oh, okay.
Right now, you have a homeowner who's got a flooding concern in their basement. They're hooking it up into the sewer system, the pipe in the basement or drain in the basement. And now we're going to suggest, well, instead, we want you to disconnect that and then send it out to your driveway or the street?
That's something you'd have to look at in an individual case. That's why I said that's a very difficult process to go into in dealing with the homeowners, because they're difficult to homeowners, because the homeowners are reluctant to let anyone in their houses, because most of the time they know that they have.
It's more about their concern about preventing the whole purpose of the sump pump to begin with is to get the water away. Now you're saying move it in, not to mention the fact if it's a winter condition, you're talking black ice and other concerns of, and you certainly can't shoot water. You can't shoot water into the public roadway either for safety concerns.
Exactly. So you have
that's
to
a
explore
tough
it
ask.
on a case-by-case situation depending on the house.
Okay.
So then along those same lines is until the moratorium is lifted, in accordance with the state regulations, there is a 4-to-1 removal, so that once the moratorium is lifted, any developer that comes into the town, you have to remove 4 gallons of II for every new gallon of new sewer flow on developments that are greater than 15,000 gallons per day. And that's a regulation in 314 CMR 12.04. So that's something that the town will enforce moving forward. So that is the end of the second section. So if you have any questions, let me know.
No.
Hearing none, I'll move on to the next. The next is we established discussions with the Lowell Regional Wastewater Utility and the other tributary communities. I mean, the preferred option to increase any capacity has always been and will remain is to acquire additional capacity at the treatment plant itself. The treatment plant itself has begun the process of trying to re-rate the plant by looking at a hydraulic analysis of the entire plant and all their processes to identify potentially any bottlenecks and to try and improve flows, to try and get flow to move better through the plant. The procedure is going to be very complex, and it's going to take probably at least 2 to 3 years. And again, at the end of that, there's no guarantee that EPA and Mass DEP will increase their limit. But Lowell itself is right now trying to look for an increase of around 5 million gallons a day, which if you're using Chelmsford's percentage, would add approximately another 500,000 gallons a day for Chelmsford to go to the Lowell plant. Lowell itself, as I've said earlier, they're at their limit. If you look at their average over the last 5 years, their limit is 21.06, and their average over the last 5 years was 21.2. Lowell, in discussions with the Lowell Regional, Lowell itself does not have any large-scale plans for II removal within the city. Instead, they're focusing on the storage and treatment during combined sewer overflow events. That's what their focus is going to be. So when it gets into the 4-to-1 regs, and in looking to, there may be an option of exploring rehabilitations of the sewer system in Lowell itself to gain capacity in Chelmsford. But again, without any large-scale plan in II areas like we have for Chelmsford, that's going to be a little more difficult as well. So again, along those same lines, since Tewksbury did have available capacity, they still have approximately half of their limit left. We spoke to the DPW director in Tewksbury, and based on our discussions with him, they have seen significant growth over the last few years in development. They expect that trend to continue. However, they didn't seem unopposed to the idea, but again, they asked how much Chelmsford would be potentially looking for, and we told them about approximately 250,000 gallons a day would be about the starting point. So Tewksbury right now is a long shot, but we have to wait again until what they complete their system. Along the same lines, we looked at the town of Billerica, because Chelmsford has pump stations that are near Billerica that with a little bit of changes to the system, you can send some additional flow from those pump stations directly into Billerica. So again, we contacted Jeff Combs, the superintendent of the Billerica Water Resource Recovery Facility. The town right now of Billerica is approximately 85%, and they have 3 sewer projects left to complete over the next 2 to 4 years from what they told us. And they didn't say no, but again, they will wait until all their sewer projects are completed. We still explored the 3 options of getting wastewater into Billerica, and it was 3 stations of the Progress Ave pump station, the Edgewood Road pump station, and the Mill Road pump station. Of those 3, the best one would be sending the Mill Road pump station back up and into Billerica. But again, it's not worth exploring until Billerica itself gives us the okay. So that's the end of my discussions with Lowell, Tewksbury, and Billerica. So if there's any questions.
The only comment or question I have is that obviously Billerica and Tewksbury are going to look for their own interests, which we've heard. Lowell seems to be talking about, you said, this method that addresses stormwater conditions, but yet doesn't increase their regular permitted capacity. So I don't quite get how that helps them with their development concerns, because if they're at capacity, I don't see how a stormwater thing deals with their normal conditions. But I guess
CSOs will.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think the CSOs will hold, and they'd be able to disperse. They'd store and treat the CSOs instead of having it going through the plant right away, so that they could control when it's going through and not going through during a high storm period.
Okay.
So they're looking at all kinds of they're looking at storage and treatment of CSOs and stormwater in that. So I think that their plan is to hold it and treat it and discharge it at times when the flows at the plant are lower. But I would have to confirm that with Lowell. They didn't provide a ton of details of what the plan is. They are still in the development of that plan.
But regardless, they're at capacity and they've got a concern. And even if they were to engineer and design additional capacity, there's no requirement that they share the capacity with Chelmsford or other towns under the regional agreement.
Correct.
And my recollection is going back to 2007 when this first was discussed with Lowell. We were told at that time that Lowell, if there were to be additional capacity developed, that obviously Lowell would utilize that for its own purposes. Now, again, that may have changed, but clearly it's very clear that they have a capacity concern as well. And so, yes. So again, it doesn't appear to be, and then the other big issue obviously is the big focus on the media and everything else is the whole combined sewer overflow, which is what's generating a lot of attention right now, which is independent of this daily capacity issue, which is going to cost funding that does not appear to be attainable right now, but it's getting a lot of environmental attention.
Yes, it's been, I've seen that in the news, and it's even trickling down, I think, to the Greater Lawrence sanitary district, because they're addressing their overflows as well.
Okay.
John, I have a couple of questions before you get to the next section, and I think they actually may go back to the Chelmsford section, but one is that you were referring to the Weston and Sampson 2018 report, and there's an excerpt from that report in the appendix. So in that report, there's an annual maintenance plan, Paul, starting in fiscal 20. So did we fund that maintenance plan in fiscal 2021 and 22? It's this colored chart here.
The last chart on the last page?
Yeah.
No, I can answer that, I think.
Go ahead.
It was not funded in accordance with that table that you're looking at, but the staff in Chelmsford has gone with their equipment and cameras, has started going into looking into the cameras in those areas in accordance with that plan.
Okay.
You guys, the staff in Chelmsford is doing it themselves.
Right.
At the moment.
With the cameras and the smoke and the other aspects out there. And that was part of the information that we won't discuss tonight, but we'll discuss regarding the Southwell issue probably in 2 weeks, once we get the legal reviews of that situation.
Well, and that was I guess in part why I was also asking, because you mentioned the II and that 2018 report had recommendations for managing the II. So when we say Chelmsford's doing it themselves, did we start doing it ourselves in fiscal 20, or did we just start recently
No, this
as
is,
a result of the DEP violations?
this was before the Southwell.
Yeah, you started that in like 2018, 2019.
Okay. And then the other thing that you referenced multiple times is this April 9th, 2010 report. And I think somewhere in your recommendations, you recommend that we go back and look at that? Or
Yeah, that
aspects
report
of
also-
it? So what specifically are you suggesting we look at? And can we get that report?
Sure, yeah.
I mean, should we be reviewing that at one of these meetings?
Do you want-
The gist of that report, it also talked about doing a public outreach program and some pump removals as well, which is that's why we went back to that 2020 report.
Okay.
There was water conservation measures, there was a public outreach program. So, I mean, we're similar, it's the same thing. The best way to approach inflow is getting the homeowners on board. I mean, one of the components for investigating, as Paul said, is a program of smoke testing, which that's an extensive, very costly program, and chances are you don't find a lot in a newer system because, I mean, if the homeowner knows the smoke testing is coming, they're just going to come and disconnect their sump pump, and when the smoke testing goes by, then they'll reconnect their sump pump. That's what we've seen in numerous other communities.
Okay. And then, I don't want to get into the DEP consent order tonight, but Paul, like you mentioned, the DEP consent order for the pump station failures. And that'll be a topic another night. But there were 4 violations in there. 2 of them had to do with wastewater, but the other 2 had to do with II and a collection system O&M plan. And what I'm trying to understand is, do any of these recommendations that you're giving also interrelate to that, or is that a completely separate?
No, it does relate to this. I mean, the big component is the 4-to-1 removal,
Right.
which is it's a state reg. But the collection system plan, that's a requirement of the effluent discharge permit, the NIPD's permit from them, and that's due on December 1st of this year. And we're assisting, as part of the ACO assistance, we will be assisting Chelmsford with helping them put together that collection system O&M plan.
Okay.
The for lack of a better term, the meat and potatoes of it has already been assembled. We have to go through that with the Chelmsford staff as part of the ACO and finalize that as well. So yes, we will be doing that, and that will all take into consideration the flows. And we will also be having ongoing discussions with Mass DEP with regard to the II program, because they're also aware of your system being as new as it is, and the difficulty of finding II in a newer system. Like I said, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Was your recommendation in this 2010 report, where you said we've been doing it ourselves, it's titled Annual Sewer Maintenance and II Identification on this annual maintenance, this annual plan. So was that a recommendation that would address the II and the O&M, or am I misunderstanding?
Yes,
those are the
start of
same
it.
2 topics, basically.
Yes, that's
Okay.
the start of it, correct.
All right, thank you. So you still have another section to summarize, right?
And this is the quickest and the easiest one to probably go through. The last thing that we looked at was the option of an in-town wastewater solution. And in order to do that, what the town would need to do would be to construct a small wastewater treatment facility itself that would have a groundwater discharge, because the DEP and EPA are no longer allowing discharges to the rivers and streams. So you'd have to find a site for groundwater discharge. The plant itself would be up near the Southwell Field pump station itself, which sees approximately 1 million gallons per day, and it would collect the flows up there for a treatment plant. So the first thing that you would have to do is you have to find a site to get the wastewater, the treated effluent from a treatment plant into the ground. So what we did is we created a screening process of the entire tributary area that goes to Southwell Field, which included approximately 3,700 acres in the entire study area. We weeded out all the lots that we identified using GIS maps and screening of bedrock, till, and any open water. And those 3,700 acres was reduced down to 2,500 acres, which included approximately 2,600 potential parcels to allow for wastewater, treated effluent wastewater into the ground. From those 2,600 parcels, we whittled it down based on a screening process, which is it's basically figures 2 through 13 in the report and tables 7 through 18. They just go through the different things that we looked at and the criteria of finding a site. So what we did is, if you look at table 19 of that report, which I'm not sure.
Send me to a page number.
It's on page 26.
Thank you, Paul.
Oh, you beat me to it. Based on the scoring from our screening alternative process, this table shows the top 30 sites in the tributary area of Southville. And then we further investigated and found 5 recommended sites for further investigations. Those 5 sites range from one of the discharge locations is the softball fields right at Southwell Field. This is approximately about 500 feet from the pump station. Of the 5, the farthest one was about 15,000 feet away, or about 3 miles. They ranged with about anywhere from 1.5 miles to 2 miles away. But the next investigation would be to conduct more further hydrogeological studies and sampling in those 5 sites if the town feels it's worth pursuing an in-town solution, which again, it's a very costly process. A treatment plant itself can range anywhere from $20 to $40 million based on the size of the plant that you want to build. So, I mean, the option is there. It's obviously not the most cost feasible one, but it would provide, you could go with a smaller treatment plant that would work in conjunction with the Southwell Field pump station, whereas when the pump station reached a certain level of pumping, then the overflow would go to an in-town pump station. That is something that we could explore somewhere down the road if the town decided they wanted to explore that option. So with that, that's basically everything that's contained in that report, but in much less detail than what's in there.
So Paul, what do you recommend?
Well,
Next.
I guess my thought in having read the report and reflected upon it is there's no immediate or midterm solution. That appears evident. And I think when I thought about this, and this kind of goes back to the growth strategy goal and concern that I had, is what if we did nothing? In other words, we haven't discussed or analyzed what does the constraint mean to Chelmsford that we're at or near capacity, because, and I know Steve's on the call and Gary Perschetti, but right now, the way the system is we have an allocation of sewerage in the community with the remaining capacity in terms of what was permitted on undeveloped lots or what's permitted. And in the year we've had the moratorium in effect, we haven't seen any constraint on residential property owners, certainly in terms of somebody wants to put an in-law apartment on or an addition or a bedroom, what have you. And then obviously for large-scale developments like UMass West Campus or River Neck Road, redevelopment of the old Mercury computer site, they've looked at on-site treatment plants. But when I started hearing $20 to $40 million just for the plant, never mind the other associated costs, and recognizing the limited capacity or benefit that comes from it, I think the question has to be asked, at this point, what if there's no action? What is the impact of no action? And I don't know that, we sort of, and even in John's report, he kind of said, well, if we'd start out looking at 250,000 gallons, just as a number thrown out there. But I guess the question that I have is, and again, I'm not expecting an immediate answer, but we're coming up to the expiration date of the moratorium, and clearly the moratorium can't be lifted next month. But I think I would want to, and I think the community would want to know what's the demand side of the equation. In terms of, we have a town that's relatively built out, and we're obviously in some type of a change of environment, where yes, we have some vacant capacity on 129, but we're always going to have some vacant capacity on 129 in some manner or form of a healthy market. And if there is this trend towards redevelopment of office space, which is personnel, based in terms of number of employees, number of flows per employee, to this mixed-use type of development where they want high bay space or they want fulfillment centers and so forth, I guess the question becomes, before we, sink in another $100,000 for a study on locations throughout the community that might, not to mention how you would talk about the political realities and feasibility aside from the cost of locating a plant, for example, at the UMass West Campus site or one of the other neighborhood sites, and not to mention the pushback and blowback you'd get, because we saw what happens in Lowell with being people who live next to a treatment plant. I guess what I'd want to better understand is what is the demand requirement? Because I think I think we've blew the whistle early enough in the game, perhaps, that we're not at a crisis stage where, you're nervous every time a toilet flushes. And I think, I don't know if you have any insights in that, John, or Gary and Steve, but I guess the question is, because even if you get 250,000 additional capacity, but then what happens when you hit that wall? In other words, what is it to the point where we become more like perhaps Westford, where, hey, you want to develop, then you've got to either remove I&I by a 4-to-1 methodology to create capacity, or you're putting an on-site
The
treatment
4-to-1
plant.
is not even, that's not something we adopt. That's a law.
That's a
We
law.
have
That's
to do
what
that.
I'm saying. Yeah, but that could allow capacity. For example, if somebody, wanted, had some issue of capacity in terms of sewer capacity constraint. Anyway, I'll just stop there. I don't know if you have any thoughts, John or Gary or Steve or anybody at the table, in terms of, I don't want to forget the other side of the equation. We focus extensively on the, supply side. And then as I thought on this the last week or so, as I read the report and thought about it, I say, wait a minute, what's the demand side? Particularly in an environment right now where, there doesn't appear to be an appetite for more multifamily development expansion on existing sites as opposed to, land such as West Campus where they could have an on-site solution. And again, I don't know that we have enough from the industrial commercial aspect, because when I spoke to Lisa Maroney, I said, Lisa, are you hearing a concern? Are you getting any concerns in terms of, a demand, for, on that aspect? So I just think I think the short, immediate solution is there's no lifting of the moratorium next month, but I think as we move forward, we ought to measure both supply and demand to make sure we've got a good target of where we want to be. And perhaps one of the outcomes might be that there is no expansion in the immediate or interim future, and that if at some point in time technology changes or Lowell's able to get that plant modified and we're able to secure a buffer, then maybe that helps us. But I don't know. But that's my initial thought in reading this was there's no ready-made or short or medium-term solution, and when you start looking at the numbers and costs and effort and political realities of a long-term solution in town, I just wonder if that's even attainable.
Well, how long is that, excuse me, a contract with Tingsboro? Is that,
That runs till like 2037, just like our contract with Lowell. I don't think at the end of the day, we could sever our contract with Tingsboro, just like I don't think Lowell could sever their contract with us that goes to Tingsboro.
but they've used, in the last year or so, they've used like 50% of the capacity?
Yeah, and they've wanted to shift the capacity to the Chelmsford side of the
Yeah.
river. But then that became a whole issue with the capacity of the Southwell plant and pipes and so
Right.
forth. And again, when he's talking 20 to 40 million for an N-type plant, there's also the cost of what would it cost to your infrastructure, pump stations and pipes,
I get it.
you know, to pipe additional flow, which is, and so, yeah, so George, that's really out there. I don't see us securing any, I don't see Kingsborough surrendering any back to Chelmsford, and in fact, they have their own concerns.
Well, would they join, in a, like a common, like a partnership type of thing on that one,
I think they're so far away at this point, right?
I
They're
mean,
not.
They are
even-
developing quickly, but, I mean, I don't know how,
I
and
don't see
maybe
them-
Westford too? I don't know if Westford would,
I just don't see any immediate demand in the short or midterm future where they would step up to the plate and make that kind of a commitment. And then again, you still run into the siting costs and everything else of, look at the reaction people have living next to an asphalt plant, okay? Now you're gonna suggest to people, we'd like you to welcome a sewage treatment plant, when their only known experience in this area is the Greater Lowell plant, which you get out on certain summer days, you don't want to be in certain neighborhoods in Lowell on either side of that river. I
have,
Yeah.
no, does anybody else have any comments?
My only thought was something that you brought up before, which is our existing open capacity within the buildings that we have versus, where it could go. So in other words, if we had
Right.
more business come in, where are we today for open capacity versus, we're certainly driving to get more and more people in these buildings, and, what the impact of that might be. I don't know what the sensitivity is
Right.
of that. I don't want to dismiss that at all.
Right.
Until I kind of understand.
Exactly,
the
that's what I'm saying. I
sensitivity.
think that warrants the additional, if we're going to do some additional analysis, it might be on the demand side as opposed to the supply side in the short-term future.
Ken, were you trying to say something?
No, I'm sorry.
Okay, Pat, do you?
Yeah, I guess my comment would be, given the cost of any new infrastructure, I think we should, the focus should be on the II removal, and if that means partnering with somebody from Chelmsford to do the II removal in Lowell, I think we should maybe consider that. Because that's to not do that is just making a bad situation worse. So,
Right.
and I think that's a less expensive, mitigation factor or option than building new infrastructure, or even talking to these other communities where we'd still have to redirect our flow over there. It's not simple, but it's something that needs to be done.
Yeah, how that would work is a party would have to remove inflow and infiltration in Lowell, and then Lowell would take a portion of that, then they would credit back a portion of that to the town and to the person who does that. And again, I think you're only going to see that on a macro level, not on a micro level. I don't see somebody who's looking to put in a 2-family, 3-family home is going to do that. It's really if
But it's only for- yeah.
some pharmaceutical company wants to go
Right,
develop
yeah.
on
Expand, yeah.
which we're not,
Yeah, and as far as even, like you've alluded to, is a treatment plant, I think if you were to take a poll of the town, everybody would just shut the gates right now and not let anybody else come in and not let any more construction, in any manner. So I don't think there'd be the appetite for that at all in town.
So,
Paul, I agree with everything you said, Paul, with the summary. The best approach, I think, for Chelmsford right now is to continue doing what you're doing with the II program, which we'll get into at a later time with the whole ACO thing, and try and find the capacity that way. That I agree is and just continue to monitor the flows, keep an eye on them, and see what you have for people that want to come in And when they want to come in, they say, okay, where can we find this 4-to-1 removal?
So at what,
So-
go ahead.
I'm sorry.
No, but at what point, John, or do we stop calling it a moratorium and just call it our state? And, because the word moratorium suggests it's going to be lifted soon. And I think that's
Right.
the concern that I have is, it also gives you the stigma of moratorium, which
Right.
the town of Westford doesn't have a stigma of moratorium because they don't have anything to go to. And I guess the question is, at what point do we stop calling it a moratorium and just say, we're at the point where we have, fixed capacity, we have existing utilization, we also have assigned utilization capacity, and that's where we're at.
Right, if you look at the Appendix A of that report, you don't have to go to it now, but I mean, the flows in Chelmsford have been trending down over the rolling averages have dropped over the last few years. It was only in fiscal year, it was through December 2018 through November 2019 was the only time you guys exceeded your 2.66. Otherwise, at the end of fiscal year 21, you were down at 2.42.
And that was because look what our flow was these last 2 months in July and August of this year.
Right, they did jump up, but again, when we looked at the research over the last 5 years, that has happened before. So
Right.
that it isn't a huge alarm right now. But again, that just comes back to yes, it's storm related.
Right.
So my thoughts, Paul, were that, I'm sorry, but I just disagree with the statement that we blew the whistle early enough, because that it did have impact. We have now construction going on where we're putting in septic systems, and there was an entire strategy with the Board of Health years ago to come off the septic and go on to sewer. But that aside, I agree with the statement, do nothing right now in terms of trying to develop our own treatment capacity. For all the reasons everybody's already said, but I don't agree with just do nothing in general. I think that there's, I'd like to see these options ganted out or something. I'd like to we keep talking about understanding better our II and our O&M, and I don't, maybe DPW or whoever has put pen to paper on all that, but it feels like we don't have pen to paper on it. We haven't really sharpened our pencil to know where we stand, what we're going to do, what's the timeline. So my other thought here was I would like to see the 2010 report, since it was referenced a few times. I don't know if this report has been distributed to the Planning Board and the Board of Health. It may be worth having them look at it, and maybe we invite them to one of our meetings to talk about it at some point, because I think those are the three primary boards, right? To say, okay, well, they can watch this discussion, but now, given that we've had the discussion, we're going to sharpen our pencils, and this is what we're going to do, and this is what we're not going to do. And just make sure we have alignment, because I know the Board of Health has has opinions about the sewer system, and the Planning Board has concerns about it, and I think it would just be helpful to have that dialogue so everybody's on the same page on what we are going to do or what we're not going to do.
Excuse me, sorry.
Go ahead.
If Lowell can't get any additional capacity, and they build out the Hamilton Canal deal, if that comes in, can they cut us back, or,
No, we have a binding contract.
Well, how many years we have left?
I think it's 2037. I think it's another 15 years, at least.
Because I think that they're getting closer to that, it seems that way if they.
Right.
And that would obviously have a terrific impact.
Yeah, no, I don't see how they could do that. And not legally, at least, through 2037, but again, I don't see how at the end of 2037.
They couldn't cut us out, is that?
No, because then why would they, and then how would you choose? Do you cut out Drake it, do you cut out Chelmsford, do you cut out Tewksbury, how do you, and on what basis? I mean, you can imagine the pitfalls that would come with that, and again, I'm not suggesting we do nothing, all I'm suggesting is that we pivot towards the demand side, so we better understand what is the constraint, if any, and we can understand that. And the I&I.
Absolutely, but then we
exactly.
got to also understand
With
from
the
our
I&I.
infrastructure standpoint,
Right.
what are we actively going to go do?
Right.
And is what we've been doing for O&M and I enough, or do we need to do more?
Right, and I think that's what we'll touch upon with John in a couple of weeks about a plan going forward, and a lot of that will come during the ARPA discussions as well, as, because we have had an aggressive sewer infrastructure, modernization plan for a system that's not that old in terms of replacing pump stations and so forth, and I think that continues along with the I&I.
And if there's a couple of milestones that we want to keep track of that are happening in Lowell or Billerica or Tewksbury with respect to their decision timelines and other things they're doing, I think, I just would like to see that in some kind of simple form, so it's on a dashboard and we all know.
Right.
We know what we're doing, and we know what we've got to go watch for and go work and influence with the other communities.
And I just want to point out, we have funding available in the appropriation that we obtained from town meeting last fall in 2020. We attained a $150,000 appropriation, and when I checked with John today, what have we expended? We've expended just over $80,000. So we have, and also working with Darlene and John, so we have funding available to do some of this additional steps.
Yeah.
Not to mention the fact that there is over $2 million in the sewer capacity fund as well. So I don't want people to feel that we're stalemated or that we don't have the resources to do the ongoing work. I'm just trying to steer it in the appropriate direction.
Ken, did I step over you trying to say something? I thought I saw him.
No, you're fine. Well, I'm just going to my sort of 2 cents was, before we had the movement at town meeting in the spring over the sewer issues, it was really a build moratorium. You really didn't have any options. And I think that put the Board of Health in an odd position, because now they sort of were forced to accept septic systems again when they were working so hard to, dwindle those down in the town. So I don't know. I get the do nothing for now, because, as Paul said, there's no short-term solution. And I think we do have some time to figure out a solution. And I think you're right, Virginia. We need to investigate and make sure we clearly understand the timeframes in each decision and which ones are viable and which ones aren't.
Okay. So, I guess, Paul, do you want to come back at another meeting to sort of summarize what we've said and the path forward that
Yeah, I think
you
what
and
the
Gary
takeaways I had from this is that we'll distribute this report to the Planning Board and the Board of Health, and then we'll work to formulate sort of a next phase of analysis based on the discussion that took place this evening, and then come back here
Okay.
and sort of have a discussion about, this is our next steps. But I do want to remind the fact is, the moratorium is set to expire in less than a month. I don't know, Steve, the date on the moratorium is October?
I thought it was September.
No, it's October, right, Steve or Gary?
Yeah, it's the end of October, because we carried it through after fall town meeting on purpose in case there was some action needed, so it's Halloween, basically.
Yeah, so again, that also is another checkpoint where we've got to come in and decide what we do. So, okay, so I think that's what we do at this point.
Anybody
And
have
just
anything
to
else?
reiterate what Paul said, as the ACO becomes clearer in the final signed one, it's going to be clearer, I think, of the approach of attacking the II, like you said. So I just wanted to support that. I agree with what Paul was saying.
Okay.
And earlier today, we did receive the ACO, revised ACO from the DEP. I immediately forwarded it to Paul Haverty, asked him to get his comments back legally for a legal review as soon as possible, to bring it before this board, clearly no later than 2 weeks from now. If it can get done next week, we'll do it, but if not, 2 weeks from now.
Okay.
Because it is so timely. So, okay. And so we'll see you then, John, at that time, once we get the legal review.
Thank you, John.
Thank you all. Have a good night.
Thanks. Okay, Darlene.
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the board, Select Board. I'm here tonight to give you a status update on the fiscal 21 end-of-year report. I did submit all of my balance sheets to the Department of Revenue. We did get our free cash certified. I think you've all been notified of that. What I'd like to do is go through, just give you a little, I won't spend a lot of time. It's actually all a good news story. We did really well this year, as you can tell by what our free cash was certified at.
Do you want to mention the number for people watching at home, Darlene?
Sure. I was just going to leave. I was going to leave everybody in, like, just. So our free cash was certified at $5,670,686 was the actual number that was certified. That's probably one of the highest free cash numbers, I think. I think that's probably the highest free cash number since I've been the town accountant that I've seen. What I'd like to do is just run through some of the categories, first starting off with the way we were with revenues, and then go into some expenditures. But to go out talk about is our local receipts, and some of the line items under local receipts. Local receipts was really the majority of the revenue that we received that kind of pushed our free cash to such a high number. Our budgeted number for local receipts was $8.9 million, and we actually took in almost $13 million. So there was a big chunk of the change right there. And the categories that came in that I'd like to highlight are motor vehicle excise. Paul and John, when they set the budget for fiscal '21, thought it would be a smart thing to do is to be conservative with the budget. I think everybody, a lot of the towns were doing that. We weren't sure. We were in a pandemic. We weren't sure what was going to be happening. So the budget, not only on the revenue side, but on the expenditure side, we were very conservative with budgeting. But so the motor vehicle excise, we collected about $460,000 more than our $4.9 million. And there was just a small increase from the prior year. Again, we still see this number. We always seem to exceed. I'm just not sure. Again, I kind of get cautious, but a lot of people, they're saying that there's a car shortage, the chips, so I'm not sure what we're going to see for the upcoming year. We won't see our large commitment revenue for motor vehicle doesn't come in until January, so we won't be able to see what that is for the upcoming year. The permitting fees, we exceeded that by just a little over $2 million. It was an 87% increase from the prior year. We did have we had $1 million permitting fee that came in from the Thermo Fisher Scientific, so that was really where that number really kind of pushed us over. So that's just kind of an anomaly. It's one time. We won't be seeing that again. Really happy to see, though, meals tax. I think people were just like, you know what? I know I'm going to, I'm sick of sitting home. I'm going to go out and I'm going to have dinner. And because we were 10% over last year, and we were $275,000 over our budgeted amount. Room tax, we were less than the prior year, but we made our budgeted number there, so we did well with the rooms tax. And then on miscellaneous revenues, we exceeded that number. It's mostly through the SRECs. We and the DPW manager, the energy manager and DPW actually just sold off some of our did some solar credit sales. We can do that, sell off some of our back to the grid. So we actually took in a little bit more than that. That's really where that money came from, with some of those sales from that. I just want to talk, we did some of the other line items that I didn't list here, but I'm just going through. If you look at the local receipts, our fees, we were 40% over our budgeted number. Most of those came in from the fire department fees, town clerk, and from police outside detail. We get a 10% fee for our outside detail. And there have been, if you know, around town, you see there's been a lot of detail going on, so we get a little bit of percentage for that. Other licenses, we made that number like 71% from over the budgeted. Most of that was all Board of Health licenses fees. And on the fines and forfeitures, most of that was for the dog fines, was where that came in. Taxes, we're always, John does a great job collecting our property tax. We were like a 99% property tax. Can't really get much better than that. So that's really, if anybody has any questions on revenues, those are kind of the highlights. Again, we were, almost $4 million just on local revenue. We exceeded the budget. On the expenditure side, we had, it was a level funded budget to start, and we did have some town meeting appropriations. Some departments needed a little budget increases during the course of the years of town meeting, so we did do that. But we had about $1.7 million of encumbered fiscal '21 funding. 1.4 million of that is the school department. They always encumber all of their funding, and they are allowed to do that. We, on the other hand, can't, the town side, we can't encumber salaries, so any monies that are left over for salaries always have to go back to the general fund. And that's pretty much, public safety and DPW were the two higher numbers that we actually got a return back on salaries. So we returned back about $919,000 back to the general fund, which also helps with the bottom line of your free cash. So if you want to go to the free cash calculation, when I close out free cash, or when I close out my balance sheet, we get a number that's called your undesignated fund balance. We'll be going to, we're going to be having a conference call tomorrow with our S&P for our bond rating, getting ready to go out for borrowing. They'll be happy to see that they like to see this number increase over the course of the year. We've actually, our undesignated fund balance is $6.8 million. That's a $2.9 million increase from the prior year. So that's something that they like to see, and it's about a 5%. It's about 5% of our total budgeted amount. How free cash is really certified is, there's an equation to this. You get to your undesignated fund balance, you have to back out any real estate property tax that's still owed to the town, any deficits that may be, small deficits that may be sitting on your books, and then you actually add in your deferred revenue, a revenue that you're deferring for a later date for a collection, and that's really what the DOR will certify as your free cash, and you'll see that's what that number was. Basically, I told you the sources of our free cash were the expenditures return, the $919,000 from departmental receipts from the fiscal year, and then prior year encumbrances. People, like we have the 1.7 this year, if all of that doesn't get used, that actually gets closed back to the general fund, so that helps with your free cash. We had the revenue surplus of local receipts of the 3.8. Tax collection, what the tax collection is that it was just, we actually collected more than what we had committed, so that gives us a little bit extra there. And then our net stabilization transfer to the general fund, we actually put money into the stabilization fund, but we actually took a $2 million out, and that net actually helps with your bottom line on your free cash also, because it's part of a revenue source. Any questions on how that was certified? Okay.
No, good, thanks.
The other pieces I just wanted to show you is I wanted to go through my balance sheets, because these are all what they consider, the DOR has to certify all of the enterprise funds, free cash or undesignated fund balance. Because these are self-funding and they're like little businesses in themselves, they have to have their own free cash, and the DOR has to certify them. On the sewer enterprise, the undesignated fund balance is $576,662. That's what the DOR certified. I'm going to just go through my calculation of how this works. Is if you look at this balance sheet and you say to yourself, expenditures were more than the revenue control, then they overexpended. their budget. So why would they should have a negative free cash and not a positive free cash? The way that the balance sheet works for enterprise funds is they are allowed to, there was probably projects on the books that I had reserved for expenditure from the prior year. I then, they can, that's actually, it's not sitting in a budgeted line item, it's actually just sitting on the reserve for expenditure. I then close that out. So that actually adds that money back to their account. Then I reserve again on any expenditures projects that they haven't completed. I have to make sure I reserve that on the balance sheet because it can't be part of their undesignated fund balance. So in this case, it was you take the 4,000,006 and minus the 4,700, they actually had a deficit of $142,000. I added back $795,500, which was the reserve for expenditure from the prior year. Then I had to reserve $496, so it only left them $157,883.62 in a positive, which added to their prior year undesignated fund balance, giving you the $576. And that's kind of how it works on all of the enterprise funds. If you aren't familiar with balance sheets, it may not make a lot of sense to you, but stormwater, it was exactly the same thing. They had a small prior year reserve for expenditure. They actually were in a positive balance. They actually, their expenditures were less than their revenue. They took in more than what they expended. So we actually added just a small amount of $52,526 to their beginning undesignated fund balance in the prior year. So right now they have a free cash balance or undesignated balance of $211,257. The other, so many enterprise funds, was the golf course. The golf course this year, they didn't do any projects over at the golf course. It was mostly all revenue coming in. They had done prior work to some of the greens in the prior year, so they really only had a small little $3,381 expenditure. So almost all of that revenue went to their undesignated fund balance. So right now they have a balance of $186,095 in their undesignated fund balance. In any of these undesignated fund balance, again, they can be appropriated. They have to be appropriated at town meeting for projects that need to be done in any of these. In the second to last one, we have the PEG access, which is our the cable TV. They also had a prior year reserve for expenditure of $20,000, but then they had voted at the town meeting 2 projects that totaled $90,000, which I reserved because they hadn't even started the project yet. So they just had a small, $97,00878 got added to their prior year undesignated fund balance to give them a total of $379,934.55 of free cash. I think that's it on the
form was the last one.
Oh, and the form. Sorry. Did I
Doesn't see that in here.
The last one.
I saw it in here, though.
There's not a
The
slide
last
for
one,
it.
the last page.
Last one. Gotcha.
Where are you looking, Paul?
Oh, it was the last page of that grouping. I
Actually,
think.
I didn't even.
No, there's nothing on the form in the packet.
I do have it
Not on the
somewhere.
PowerPoint.
Oh.
Did I not put it in there?
No, it's okay. You can talk to it.
I can talk to it, though, because I have the, I have it
I
right here. I have it right here.
I took it off the website.
I have
See?
it right here. So, on the form, yep. So there, they had a free cash certification of $267,920. And I want to make sure that I'm in the right, here we go. So we didn't do any, there was no projects done over there. They were going to be doing a project, but that was on a town meeting warrant, but we actually pulled that. So the only thing was just revenue that was collected, and the revenue collected was 666,581, which added to their prior year to make it the 267,9. So there wasn't really much activity at the forum at all, except for the revenue that we receive for the use of that. So that's that. Just to give you a little update where we are now, I just closed up. The reports I gave you was actually through July. We just finished closing up August, so I don't really have much to really talk about. These reports were only 1 month in. So we just really, everybody's at where they're supposed to be. If you look at this list, probably the one that jumps out is the benefits insurance. We're already at 40% expended. That is because we pay a lot of our stuff up front. We pay Middlesex, a lot of the benefit stuff we pay up front because we get discount costs if we pay that early. So we always pay those in July, almost July 1st. John's sending me down lots of those bills to pay, to wire out to our departments. So but other than that, all the departments are right within where they should be. And on the revenue side.
Where are you, Darlene?
Oh, I'm sorry. So it should be right on, yep, fiscal 22, you can go through the revenues. We increased the motor vehicle by $100,000 from last year. Right now, our collection right now is $358,000. This is an increase actually from the same time of last year, but that just can fluctuate. We probably had a small amount that those came in. We'll see how that works. Like I said, we'll get our large commitment in January, and we'll see how we're going to do with that commitment. Permitting fees, we're 11% increase from the prior year, but so that should remain solid. We still see building permits being pulled. That department is very busy. And we're within the benchmark of our 16% in total for revenue. So just starting off in July, I think we're just really should be doing okay, but I'll be, presenting to you as throughout the year and how we do on that fiscal 22. A couple things
Darlene, did you say?
Yep.
Darlene, did you say your building permits you're increasing by 11%?
No, they're 11% higher already than from the prior year, than what we collected at this time in the prior year.
For the 1 month.
For 1 month.
So when you do your forecast, are you removing the Thermo Fisher?
Yep, that was a prior. Yep, the Thermo Fisher one was a prior year. So this is just fiscal. This is 22. So it doesn't include that $1 million.
Right, but if you're doing your forecast, are you basing off of last year's plus X amount of growth?
We did not get that $1 million until later in the year, anyways. So that $1 million didn't come into play of last July. Do you know what I mean? So I'm just taking the number from like a snapshot from last July to this July, and we're already 11% higher than the number from last year, just as a snapshot.
That did not include the Thermo Fisher money.
Correct.
Okay. All right. No, that's what I'm asking. Okay. Thank you.
That's okay. Just want to touch base a little bit. I present yearly to the CPC, Community Preservation, but I just want to give this board where they're at. They're doing great. I just wanted to let you know where they are. They do have an undesignated fund balance. Their balance is $3.1 million. It's been our recommendation, John and I, the last probably about 5 to less than 10 years ago, they really didn't have a lot of cash, which was kind of strapping them and borrowing and maybe for larger projects. So we've been kind of recommending to them that they kind of build this fund up. Mm-hmm. And instead of spending cash, go and borrow for larger projects, which they have been doing. So now that they have this undesignated fund balance of the $3.1 million, it gives them capacity if they need to go out and borrow for a larger project. We know that they have that funding there. And when John deals with bond counsel on projects like that, they like to see what they're, because this is kind of a separate fund. CPC is kind of a separate fund also. And we vote in the spring, like we vote, money in and out to pay the debt. And really what they're doing is all of the money that the 10% just go in the buckets, but then come right back out to pay the debt off. So there's really not a lot of money in the 10% buckets because they just come in and out, but it actually keeps it clean and they can be able to add to their undesignated fund balance when they close out their books at the end of the year by doing that. And so they don't have a lot of active projects going. Most of the projects that are on the books that are right now are just for debt payments mostly. We are finished with the town halls, but they still have Chelmsford Woods and things like that they're still, and the turf fields and playgrounds and stuff that they're paying debt on. But I thought I'd just give you a little status update on them. Just a little bit on where we are with our trust funds. Of course, I just want to let you know.
Is there a handout I should show the public here?
Yeah, I'm
Which
so
one
sorry that
or-
I didn't have it. I'm sorry.
Okay, so you're just talking?
Yeah, I'm just talking.
Okay, I just noticed they had the slide up, and I'm trying to make sure I have the right thing.
The
Go ahead.
stabilization, I just thought it was good. Afterwards, I thought, I should give them all of the trust fund information. The general stabilization fund, we ended the fiscal year, there's $10.8 million in the general stabilization fund. Earnings and investments for the year was $433,897. And like I said, we transferred some money out to the general fund and out to a capital project, and then we actually transferred some back in from the free cash from last year. We moved some into that fund. So that fund is doing well, is remaining strong. And the other fund that everybody kind of asks about is our OPEB liability fund, where John invests that. The balance in that account is $17,256,17. Earnings and investments on that just for this year was $3.6 million. It's a very good, healthy fund. They have a great return on investment there. We did transfer in almost $1.7 million to that fund, and we're about 25% funded in our OPEB liability obligation, which I feel is strong. I mean, there are some communities that have done it 100%, but I think Chelmsford is in a really good position by being positioned where they are with their OPEB, and if we continue to keep putting money into that fund. So that's kind of where we're at for fiscal 21. The auditors are here. They should be finishing up with us this week. There's been I haven't heard any big concerns, but they don't always share everything until they get their until we see the audit report and the management report. But so far, we've been able to supply them everything they've asked for. They're doing a lot of work, extensive work with the ARPA funds, with FEMA funds that came through the CARES Act, and also the state money with the CARES Act, and their reopening grant with the school. So that's just something they've been really spending a lot of time, a lot of testing, just because those are really big numbers. They want to make sure that everything looks in order. And because those are all federal grants, they have to do their, the SECRA report, which that's part of the audit report. That's a separate report that just talks about all the federal grants and how we do standing-wise and all that with that. So they've been doing a lot of testing with that, along with John and his debt. They spend a lot of time on that too, but everything seems to be going good there. So it was a good news story, even though we were in a pandemic, and I think we did well. I really feel good about it. So
that's great. Thank you, Darlene and John and Paul, for all your efforts in the last year. I know it was a challenging one.
All right.
Does the board have any other questions or comments?
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Hello.
Good evening, Madam Chair, Select Board members. I'd like to provide you with an update.
Yourself, John.
Oh, I'm sorry.
For the record, for the
John
record.
Souza, Finance Director.
Thank you.
Good evening. I'd like to provide you with an update on the donation of 2 parcels of land on Bentley Lane that we discussed back in May, and then just discuss the next step in the process. So, as you recall, back in June at special town meeting voted under Article 3 to approve the donation of 2 land parcels on Bentley Lane. They were, for the record, they were parcel ID 70-311-9 and 70-311-25. And so that vote was approved by a 2/3 majority. Following town meeting, I then worked with town council to try to contact the property owners, give them an update, and get that process moving. Town council informed me in late August that the owner had executed a deed transferring the ownership to the town. Under this section of law, Mass General Laws, Chapter 40, Section 14, it requires a vote of town meeting and also the select board. So in working with attorney Chris Alphen, he had contacted me, and then really the next step in the process is to bring it to the select board and ask you to take a vote to approve the gift of both of these parcels. So it's just a sample language would be, to make a motion to accept the gift of the parcels. You can name them for general municipal purposes under MGL Chapter 40, Section 14. So that's really the next step that we'll be seeking.
You don't need that vote tonight.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, just-
Okay, well, I'll make a motion then. We approve the transfer of ownership of parcel 70-311-9 and 70-311-25 to the town of Chelmsford for general municipal purposes per Mass General Law, Chapter 40, Section 14.
I second the motion.
We have a motion and a second. Any more discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Ken?
Aye.
5-0. Thank you, John.
Thank you. And then the next item on the agenda involves, I received a couple of calls from a property owner last month, and you have a copy of an email I sent to Town Manager Cohen, just summarizing my conversations with this property owner. And in the packet, I provided a small, one-page size GIS map just to show this is the parcel that the property owner contacted me on is it's parcel 20-93-2. It's located on Columbia Street in North Chelmsford. And the reason the property owner contacted me is similar to the process that we just went through. He and his sister own a parcel of land since around 2008. I believe the history that I outlined in the email, I believe they either purchased it or it may have been for a normal amount from their father. And the property owner sought a building permit some time ago and was ultimately turned down. And so the property owners discussed this with his sister. They really don't have any use for this land because they don't have any other property in the neighborhood. And what he would like to do is to donate this land to the town of Chelmsford. So I explained to the property owner that generally the Conservation Commission does not usually look for parcels that are isolated like this. And I should explain, if you look on the map, just to orient everyone where this is, it's not right on the corner, but it's very close to the corner of North Road and Columbia Street. And it abuts a business that's right along North Road. And if you go behind this parcel, if you will, you'll see that there's a brown, the buildings are shown in brown on the GIS map. It's right, there's a residential home that abuts this property. And so those are really the two direct abutters to this piece of property. I did ask, I did explain to the property owner that would be a process to go through, and from my conversation with him, he indicated to me that neither abutter was interested in the land. So that's kind of to give you the background of how we've come to this point. And so I just wanted to bring this forward. I did bring it forward to Town Manager Cohen. I wanted to bring it forward to the board. Have you could consider it. Really, the next process would be for it to go to a future town meeting and a select board vote if you choose to accept it.
There's no conservation value to the, it doesn't adjoin conservation land, it's not in a conservation status, so that was sort of the first one, which, as you know, we could do without town meeting. I don't know what we do with the bottom line is what John's probably saying is the property owner no longer wants to pay property taxes on it, and if they stop paying property taxes, then the town has the option and the expense of going through maybe, John, you can elaborate
Yeah,
on the alternatives here.
Yeah, the issue we have is, if the property owner has indicated that, the taxes are paid currently, but he does not intend to pay the taxes any further on it since it's of no use to him. And, what we would have to do is the taxes would have to then become unpaid or delinquent status, and then there's a tax-taking process that I can go through as treasurer. Ultimately, the foreclosure case, we would file a foreclosure case after the tax lien is over 6 months old. But I do have to say, it right now, with all of the changes brought about by the pandemic, the backup in the land court, this would be at least a 3 to 4 year process for the town to actually foreclose this land and obtain the foreclosure judgment. So it would be, eventually we would be able to foreclose it if the property owner stopped paying taxes, but it will be a long process. Even though it's a small parcel, a lot of the legal work still has to be done, so you'd probably be looking at legal expenses of, I would say around $2,200 to $2,500, and there's a fee to file, a land court filing fee of about $515, so you're getting up there towards $3,000 in legal and land court costs.
Could he give it to one of his neighbors?
He could.
Would one of his neighbors want to take it as just as a gift because like you said, the town has no use for this, right, that you can think of?
No, I don't see any identified use for it. It's not like we need it for a sewer pump station or something like that, and perhaps someday the town, because that was the first thing, when John and I, one thing is like, go to the two abutters. One of them would take it for a song or whatever, just to unload it. And that's not happening. There's really just two abutters there, as you can see, who are of interest on that side of the street, right at the corner. So we kind of got two choices, of taking a land which we have no use for, or this person doesn't want to pay the taxes and then have the name put in the newspaper, and then the town incurring $3,000 of legal expenses at some point in time to acquire it by tax possession. Sort of like you got a bad choice and a worse choice. That's the problem. I don't know what, because what do we do?
I will say, if you accept the land donation, similar to what we did with the previous one, it's going to be held for general municipal purposes, which means that in the future it could be sold. It's not like conservation land where we accept it as a donation as for conservation, then it can never be sold to anyone. So possibly if you did choose to accept it, it could be of value to someone down the road. There's nothing prohibiting us from selling this in the future.
The only concern would be if you had a summer like this, you had somebody have to go over there and cut the grass or something. No, you think about these, right? Because the neighbors aren't going to be too thrilled if the grass starts growing, and it's anyway. This is the imperfect scenario that the town's
maybe if one
confronted
of the neighbors saw that the grass wasn't being mowed, they would say, "I'll buy that for $1 and I'll mow the lawn."
Then we have to go to town meeting to transfer it too. So it's anyway. This we owe the gentleman an answer, which is why John's on the agenda tonight. And then if it does go to town meeting, we can bring it up at a special or future town meeting to convey this to accept the gift to the town. But
So we expect that if we don't accept the donation, we're going to wind up going through the foreclosure
well, we don't
process?
have to. We don't have to go through the foreclosure. There's nothing that mandates the town take it by tax possession. There's
We generally
it just
do,
goes on
because
your books as
I can't leave them sitting out there because people
exactly
question
right. So
it.
he then
Yeah.
records it every year as
Yes.
a delinquent thing, and it just builds and builds. But we don't have to take it, But it's just.
Any other thoughts?
I think given those two options, we should accept it, but,
Yeah. Make another pocket park.
yeah, there you go.
Well, they
It's a
weren't
funny place for
interested
one.
in buying the parcel. Would they be interested in the other option? Just taking it?
The abutters, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, could we ask them that
That
if
way
they
we
would?
keep it off of us, so.
They would just
I mean, that's
accept
all I
it?
read.
That's what John did that. In other words, why wouldn't you just go to the neighbor as opposed to the town? And he
Well,
didn't-
yeah,
didn't
I'm
want
just
Maybe
saying
they-
that.
But has,
they
the
weren't
question
interested
I
in
think you're
buying it.
asking is, has he done that?
Yeah.
Right. I mean, the issue in my mind there would be, although he didn't bring this up in the call, is if you're donating it to a town, and again, I'm not a tax attorney, generally you could almost probably write that off or take some kind of a, that you gave it as a donation, where if you give it to a private party, the private party is different from the town. So I think that's why he's.
Oh, okay, well,
You have to get an appraisal for it, though, on that, though, right? If he was gonna do that, he'd have to
Right.
get an appraisal.
I mean, if I didn't add these details earlier, it should be, it's 7,000 square feet, and it has an assessed value of 20,300, which, as we know, is not always the same as market value, but that's what it's being assessed at.
right, I mean, and you said that he did ask his abutters and they were not interested, but yeah, they were not interested in, I'm assuming,
I
buying
mean,
it.
I can contact him again and ask if he would be willing to donate it to a neighbor. I kind of, what I inferred from the call is, I don't know if it didn't sound like a very close relationship, if you will, so I'm not sure that he would be interested in doing that, but I can ask.
I guess it doesn't hurt to ask.
Yeah, it's the only option left, I think. Keep it out of our court.
Well, otherwise, yeah, we could accept it, and like you said, we could auction it to, see if one of the abutters, if he's not willing to give it to one of the abutters, basically the town almost could, right? Have an auction of
Yes,
that.
if we, and if this land is not acquired by foreclosure, it can be sold through like a sealed bid process. It's typically the parcels that you see me auction off are ones that have been acquired by the foreclosure process. So if we were to take this donation, an abutter or any resident or anyone could come forward and either ask, I believe they would, and I'll verify this with town council, they would have to go, we'd have to take a vote at town meeting, they'd have to come to the select board and get a vote to offer it for sale, and then we go from there and sell it.
So the first article is to accept the donation of land. The second article is authorize the board to
go.
sell the parcel of land.
So I think where we've landed is see if he
Okay,
would be
all right.
willing to try to donate it to his neighbors, and
Okay.
if not, we
We'll keep
take
it
the
in
less bad option
Okay.
of accepting the donation. Is that, everybody's in agreement with that?
Yeah,
All right.
Okay.
Does that sound okay, John?
Yes, I'll
right.
contact the property owner.
Thanks for waiting. Okay, Paul.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the board. Police Chief James Spinney is on the virtual call this evening by Zoom. He's to update the board on discussions with the town of Tingsboro regarding an intermunicipal agreement regarding animal control. So, Jim, good evening, and thanks for waiting patiently to this time.
Good evening, Mr. Manager. Good evening, members of the board. With regard to the agreement, just to give you a little background. Earlier this summer, I was contacted by Tingsboro Police Chief Howe regarding the services of our animal control officer while they were in a little bit of a flux situation where they did not have an active animal control officer. So they, during the months of June and July and part of August, they had used our animal control officer, and they were very impressed with his training and his knowledge. And at the end of August, Chief Howe and Town Administrator Hanson reached out to me and requested a formal municipal agreement for the foreseeable future for the services of our animal control officer to take care of all animal-related and licensing issues in the town of Tingsboro. So I immediately talked to the town manager, Town Manager Cohen, of course, and I also consulted with ACO Mark Cianci, because his opinion is important on this, and he is supportive of moving forward with this program. He actually welcomes the opportunity. So we put the inter-municipal agreement, the framework together, and I'll go over some of the major stipulations of that. So it's a one-year term. Chelmsford will provide ACO services to the town of Tingsboro. ACO CNC schedule will maintain what it currently is, basically Monday through Friday days. The ACO shall maintain an accurate record of all activities in Tingsboro and provide a monthly report to the Tingsboro Police Department. We will also track all log entries when he responds to Tingsboro on our record management system as well. So I'll always have an updated record of how many times he is deploying to Tingsboro. He will also have access to Tingsboro's management system, so he can document reports. So patrol officers in Tingsboro, as well as administrative staff, could read his reports with the activities he's doing on a daily basis. Tingsboro shall compensate Chelmsford monthly for the ACO services. Tingsboro will pay all costs related to testing required. So in other words, if the town of Tingsboro required an animal to be tested for, let's say, rabies, or they ordered an animal to be held by a vet or tested, they would compensate us for any fees incurred for an animal in their town. Kennel fees, so if we house an animal and feed it, those would be paid directly to the town of Chelmsford, just as if it was a Chelmsford animal being held. So nothing would change in that regard. The ACO will forward any fees, fines, or penalties collected as a result of a Tingsboro incident directly to Tingsboro Town Treasurer. All equipment is to be maintained by Chelmsford. So Tingsboro will not be responsible for the procurement of any equipment. There is an exit clause if necessary. So if when this program is up and running, if for some reason either side is not happy with either the amount of time being spent or if it became too daunting, then we can reevaluate, and within a 30-day notice, we could terminate the agreement. I personally think it's a good agreement. I think it's a win-win for both communities. It's a cost-saving measure for both communities. ACO CNC is a very well-organized and proactive employee. I have no concerns. Tingsboro's calls for service would be a fraction of Chelmsford's, so I don't think this would be an overwhelming amount of extra work to be directed towards him, and it's certainly something that I would monitor. If it became of a concern, we would reevaluate. Tingsboro is also going to explore hiring a part-time animal control officer to fill in the gaps, like maybe an emergency, something late at night, someone from their community could respond directly. That could also work in Chelmsford's favor, because right now when ACO CNC is away, we have to ask the town of Barica to cover for us. So we could work something out with Tingsboro, where when our ACO is either away on vacation or whatnot, the Tingsboro ACO, albeit part-time, could fill in the gaps for us here in Chelmsford. So I think it would be fine. Myself and Tingsboro Chief Heil will monitor it and evaluate as we go.
Questions?
I didn't see any reference to hearings, Board of Selectmen hearings for dogs. I'm assuming that will be covered under this agreement.
I believe it's something back to the level where their Board of Selectmen had to address an issue. Officer CNC would have to attend.
Okay.
So I would incur that type of cost or work something out with him with his schedule. I think that's something that would be extremely rare, but just like when he has to appear in front of Chelmsford's board, we would take care of that. But I think it would be minimal.
Okay, thanks.
Does the $2,500 a month cover, is that like cover some portion of benefits as well as salary, or?
My understanding is it will go into our general fund. So his budgeted salary will stand as it is now. That $30,000 will basically cut his salary in half as far as what we ultimately are paying for him, but it would go back to general fund.
Okay. Ken, do you have any questions?
But I guess to Paul, does it have to go to the general fund?
Yes, there's no provision under state law, and I've got Darlene still in the room.
Darlene's vehemently shaking her head, Ken.
Unless the law prescribes an alternative source, all funds received by a community have to go to the general fund.
there's no way to allocate this for like some type of police training or
No.
back to the police department? No.
Okay. Do you need a vote or just a nod of support? What is, what
We're
what are you
we're
looking for?
tweaking the
Okay.
wording of the agreement with our labor, our town council and the Tingsboro Town Council. So it's whatever the board would prefer. I mean, if you want to endorse the agreement in this, general form and then authorize me to sign on behalf of the town, or instead we can bring the final one back to you for a final vote. It's whatever your preference is. Right now, we're really dealing with minor edits. It's nothing substantive. So it's whatever the board's preference is.
I'm good as long as the 30-day out remains in effect.
Okay.
So you do want to...
Ken, are you okay with authorizing them to proceed tonight?
I am, yeah.
Okay.
Okay, I'll make a motion that we approve the intermunicipal agreement between the town of Chelmsford and town of Tingsboro dated September, well, probably, I won't give it...
In general form, yeah.
Related to sharing of animal control officers.
I'll second the motion.
Motion and a second. All those in favor? Aye. Ken?
Aye.
Okay,
Aye.
5-0. Thanks, chief.
All right, thank you, have a good night.
Thank you, Chief.
Too.
Okay, that brings us to the fall town meeting warrant, Paul.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the board. 5 weeks from tonight, we'll be scheduled to be at Fall Annual Town Meeting on October 18th. I have before you the 2021 Fall Annual Town Meeting warrant, which has been reviewed in legal form by Town Council. It consists of 30 articles. Basically, the change from what you had previously seen in the last draft that I provided for you was Council broke up the zoning bylaw amendments regarding the stormwater design guidelines into 6 articles, which had previously been 1 article. Other than that, and then we have one for an unpaid bill that we received from the town of Dracut for less than $200 pertaining to a police detail going back 5 years. But anyway, so that arrived, so that's the only change from what you received at your last meeting. At this point, we seek a vote to the board to approve the Fall Annual Town Meeting warrant as presented, and then obviously we'll have it posted and forwarded off to the Finance Committee, Town Moderator, and then at Finance Committee, I received word this afternoon that they're scheduled to meet this Thursday evening virtually, so we'll present the warrant articles there, and then we'll come back starting next Monday here at your meeting to present the articles, and then that leaves you with sufficient time to then at a future meeting, either on the 27th or the 4th of October, to vote your recommendations.
Or we can vote as we go along like we did before.
Sure, whatever the board's preference, but clearly, we've got time, but the important thing right now is to get the warrant out and posted, and, the 5-week turnaround is traditional, but it's tight in the fall.
I just have one question on Article 25. It says adding underlined language and striking language shown in strike-through. The only strike-through is 2 acres. Was there nothing else that was removed? I mean, that's a funny...
It came to me from town council, so I'm looking at it, that's how it was, because he bifurcated it into all these individual ones. So yes, I believe that's correct as presented.
Okay. We had a sentence somewhere in our bylaws that said 2 acres, and that's all it said.
It said 2 acres.
2 acres were part of larger development shall have.
Right. Yes, it says 2 acres, 1 acre, or part of a larger development shall have,
Yeah, it's just kind of...
Yeah. Anyway, we can change, I can check with council to make sure that there's no miscellaneous Scribner error there, but basically I took the form back from council and adopted it.
Are you expecting any other special town meeting to be added in this time frame for 255 Princeton or any other articles? Or do you see that being further out?
I received an email from Evan Belansky today. He sent, because he had met with Melissa Robbins, who was the applicant for the developer at 255 Princeton Street. he provided the language for the zoning article to rezone with the overlay to Paul Haverty today. Obviously, it's not in time for this warrant. We also had the meeting scheduled for the joint meeting between the select board
It
and
hasn't been confirmed.
but we have a tentative date that we're looking for in, 2 weeks for the joint meeting. I then received a telephone call this afternoon from Melissa Robbins at the law firm for the applicant. And I basically told her, I said, you know, it's clear you're not ready for the fall annual town meeting warrant because we didn't have the language in time for review by our town council or even for the planning board to endorse the article. I said, we're 5 weeks away from fall annual town meeting. And I said, regardless of whether it was on the fall annual town meeting warrant or separate, it was likely that the 255 Princeton Street would be its own night of town meeting, given the magnitude of that issue. I basically said, my advice is, and we discussed this early on at the joint meeting several weeks ago, I said, would be to reach a consensus in terms of the language, also that development agreement, which we've not seen either, regarding that would guide this specific project under this overlay, and then have ample time for it to be presented and understood in the community to come back. And I said, you know, under the provisions of state law and the town charter, a town meeting warrant needs for a special town meeting warrant only requires 14 days notice for posting. But in reality, you really need at least a month. Not to mention the advertising time that you need for the zoning article to appear in the paper, have the hearing, and so forth. She understands that. They intend to come this fall, but I don't think they've zeroed in on the work that completion in order to give a timely date. So
Okay.
theoretically, it could be October 21st, but I think practically it's not going to be October 21st. Because that would, you know, that would be the third, you know, in other words, I think this warrant here for fall town meeting, even though it's 30 articles, is probably a one-night meeting.
Yeah.
Because it's very easy to understand. The first 8 or so articles are consent agenda. As I mentioned earlier, you've got 6 articles that are the zoning bylaw, and my sense is, based on what we've seen in COVID conditions, this is probably a one-night town meeting. But if it does go a second night, it's certainly no more than a 2-night town meeting. I basically just said to them, I said, I expected the select board and planning board would wait to hear from you in terms of when you'll have the development completed, when we get the language completed of the bylaw zoning amendment, when the planning board could hold a hearing, and then when you have ample time to present it to the community. And so my sense is they want to go this fall, but it hasn't crystallized in terms of what that's going to be. And I said that once that comes in, then I would expect that the select board would convene a special town meeting warrant, and then look for the planning board, I suppose, to be the sponsor of the zoning article. So that's where we're at. So I guess a long-winded answer of saying, yeah, I think they would have preferred to be on this town meeting warrant, but clearly they weren't ready. Don't have a date of when they will be at this point. Because as you said, we still haven't nailed down the details of when they're gonna come back, but what are we talking, 2 weeks away from now with the joint meeting potentially, the end of this month? Yeah. That's where we're at.
Any other discussion on the October 18th warrant? Take a motion.
Okay, I'll make a motion that we sign and post the warrant for the 2021 Fall Annual Town Meeting to begin on October 18th, 2021.
Second the motion.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Ken?
Aye.
5-0.
Great, thank you. I'll
Yep.
have that out tomorrow. On my report, just 3 quick items this evening. The first one is on Freeman Lake weed control. I guess it's a good news story in terms of that there seems to be a lot pulling into this direction. As the board and the community may be aware, nobody has seen the weeds in any ponds around here, and particularly in Freeman Lake, which is the most troublesome area, as we've seen this year with the heavy rains we had, the hot weather, and a lot of the runoff that can, So with that in mind, we had to close the lake because it was unsafe for swimming because of the weed growth at the beach area. We went back and looked at the analysis that was done 3 years ago when this was last considered. Spoke to the company Solitude Lake Management, which is the same company that provides the work on Hart Pond, which is done in conjunction with the Hart Pond Association. And the process and application would be identical, in that it's a herbicide, I guess the best way to describe it, called fluoridone, which is recognized by the EPA and the Mass Department of Conservation and Recreation as a good practice for this type of situation. Because obviously anytime you're applying chemicals, there's a concern. So I sent this, as the board knows, and thank you, Virginia, for sort of routing it when I tripped up on the email address, but the Water District examined this. We have a letter from them, from Bruce Harper, through their consulting engineer, where they agree that it doesn't pose a threat to the water supply. So with that, coincidentally, the Vinyl Square Strategic Action Plan Committee, one of the members there had a contact at this actual company, sort of going in parallel unknown processes, was actually scheduled perhaps to make a guest presentation at the Vinyl Square Committee meeting this Thursday night. But anyway, it's all coming to the same direction, where it appears that there's a consensus that something has to be done and that this is probably the most effective way to go. But in order to do it for the next season, you really have to approve the money this fall at town meeting so that you can get out there when the ice breaks in the spring to allow sufficient time for the application of the herbicides to kill the plants and the roots. There are other alternatives which will be discussed and can be considered, because when I framed the article in the warrant, I left it very broad so not to preclude any discussion or options. You can do harvesting and so forth. Again, that tends to be almost like mowing your lawn generally, in that you harvest it and then it grows back and so forth. And again, given the track record and the recommended practice, this is where we're approaching. So you're talking roughly, for the numbers that I received today, as well as looking at the 2018 proposal, you're probably in the $60,000, $65,000 range to do that. Probably a low of 50, probably a high of 65. I would tend to be conservative, because what happened this year at Hart Pond, because it was such an extraordinary year, they actually had to come back and do a second treatment, which was unprecedented. So I'd probably gravitate to the higher number. And then after that, you'd have probably annual maintenance costs of probably maybe $10,000 and so forth, depending on how it takes and where it goes. Again, our best guide is Hart Pond. So I also shared it with the Board of Health and the Conservation Commission. They're both going to discuss it at their meetings. The initial reaction I had from the chair and senior member of the Conservation Commission was that this made sense, and I haven't had any negative informal feedback yet from the Board of Health. So otherwise, if you go by there, you're going to lose the body of water at some point. It's just so pervasive. And yes, it may not be as extreme as this year, but it's just unfortunate. You have these invasive plants, and so anyway, so that's the good news on the weed control. And as I said, there is an article on the warrant you just approved, and we'll discuss it further in the weeks ahead in that town meeting. So that's a good solution. Regarding the town meeting action plan, the financial plan. Again, this sort of follows from the feedback I received from the performance appraisal, and again, just recognizing the tight time frame that we're 5 weeks from tonight, we're scheduled to gather a town meeting. And as I said earlier, the Finance Committee, as expected, I received a call from Jim Clancy today that they're going to meet on Thursday evening. So I wanted to come to you this evening to give you my perspective on how to allocate at town meeting the $5.67 million in free cash, which, as Darlene noted, is the highest amount we've ever received. Although, if you look percentage-wise, it's 4% of the town's $141 million operating budget. And if you went back to a decade to fiscal year 12, we actually had a higher percentage of 4.4% when 4.59 million was free cash. Clearly, what happened here is that this is an anomaly. When you look at our recent years of 1.7 million in free cash, the last 2 years, and under $1 million the year before that, and $1 million the year before that, we were advised, because of the unknown of the pandemic, by the Department of Revenue at the state to budget conservatively. We did, and clearly we had the extraordinary one-time permit for Thurlow Fisher, but beyond that, we're seeing this pattern of free cash happening at the federal level, happening at the state level, and happening at other towns as their free cash is getting certified. You're seeing this anomaly. But it clearly is an anomaly, and there doesn't appear to be signs, and if you look at the sources, it's probably not sustainable in the long term. So with that, the reflecting upon the Select Board's priorities to provide property tax relief and to improve the conditions of the town's roadway infrastructure, I've developed the allocation that you see there on the screen, which would be use more than half the money towards property tax reduction in a two-step phase. This current fiscal year that we're in right now, we would apply $2 million, which would equal the $2 million that was appropriated a year ago for property tax relief during the pandemic. And then the vision then, and would be the vision now, is you would then step out of it, meaning in fiscal year 23, a year from now, you'd have $1 million and then take that 50% reduction, then the final step to be zero if the free cash and conditions return to normal. So that would be the plan. And how that, but unfortunately, we can only appropriate money for the current property tax levy. So we would take that $1 million and throw it into the stabilization fund for a year and then have it, but the understanding is that we would apply the relief in the second year. So that's the first $3 million of the funding. I then worked with DPW in terms of Gary Persichetti and Steve Yonley, and we recognized that the town roadways could warrant an additional investment, and so the proposal there was, we're only getting about a third of what's needed and identified in Chapter 90 money from the state from the gas tax. The state allocation has been $200 million for the last 9 years. And despite repeated pleas from the municipal association and cities and towns, the governor and the legislature haven't gravitated off of that amount. So clearly you're getting less funding, and obviously costs are increasing. But the other question is what capacity could we really do in a construction season in terms of additional roadway and sidewalk construction? And the response I received from our DPW leaders are, we could probably take on another $1 million of projects, given the funding that we have in Chapter 90, which is $1.15 million, and then the funding that we also provide in the capital budget of roughly $500,000. So that's the plan, is to basically take $2 million. I did the rounding because we had to get to that final number. Basically $1 million this year, and we would vote it all this year, but we'd expect it to be expended half this year and the other remainder of the next fiscal year towards improvement of roadway and sidewalk construction. And then the final piece, the final pieces of it is the PFAS remediation. As we heard earlier this evening, it appears that the plans or options are going to approach about $600,000. So that I would ask the town meeting to take $600,000 in free cash and apply it under the warrant article for PFAS remediation. And then again, there'll probably be a balance from what we're hoping and seeing, but then it's going to, as we know, we run into twists and turns. And then the final piece would be the $83,045 to the sewer construction stabilization fund, which is always an article at fall town meeting, and we explain it annually, is that the sewer financial plan for debt service and betterments and so forth calls for the interest earnings on those fund holdings to be applied to the funding plan. But again, as I mentioned earlier in Ken's question about the dog fees, absent special legislation to do that, we mechanically have to do that. So John has done the analysis of our books and said we received $83,045. So that amount, would be voted, per the sewer construction stabilization fund plan, into the fund. As was mentioned earlier by Darlene, we have roughly $10.9 million in our stabilization fund. That's 77.5% of the town's $144.5 million operating budget, and that is the midpoint of the town's financial policy for maintaining ongoing financial reserves. So therefore, there's no allocation aside from this temporary $1 million that would be transferred into the fund to build the stabilization fund. Just a couple closing thoughts and perspective. This is the plan, this is a plan, okay? There are other conceivable great ideas that the town could do to use this money. And I'll run the spectrum very concisely, though. For example, John and Darlene and I were on a call today with our financial advisor, and we're going to be on a call tomorrow with Standard & Poor's. If the town's goal was, we want a AAA bond rating, then we could take this $5.67 million, put it in the stabilization fund, and we could assure you that you will get a AAA bond rating the next time you go out for the audit's done and the books are closed and our OPEB is completed. Because we've always been told when we go for our rating, when we get AA+, that what's holding the town back is we don't have, they'd like us to see higher levels of cash reserves beyond the 7.5% of our balance, closer to, as we analyze it, about 10% or so. We're not recommending that because I don't believe that's the community's priority. And quite frankly, I think the difference in interest rates that the town would get from a AAA bond issuance and a AA+ bond issuance wouldn't warrant that, quite frankly. So that would almost be like an ego trip, and I just don't see that the community or anyone would want to do that. The other thing's a little more substantive. As Darlene noted earlier this evening, we do have an other post-employment benefits liability of $54 million. As Darlene noted, we're 25% funded. Clearly, one could use a portion of this money to fund OPEB liability, and that would be a sound thing because that is a cost that's impacting future generations and is a real cost for the community. Very similarly, when John received the actuarial update on the Middlesex County retirement system, we're only just about 50% of our unfunded pension liability, but we're only now about 16 years away from the end point. So clearly, the town could appropriate money and apply it to the town's unfunded pension liability and reduce that cost on an ongoing basis. And then on a more contemporary issue, as we know, we have legitimate capital needs that have been deferred on the capital plan. You hear about them and see them every year, whether it's fire apparatus replacement or building improvements. So there are always legitimate types and uses of money. But I think, again, upon reflection and thinking back to the direction I heard from the board, and given the times that we're in, which are atypical and not failing to recognize that there are people who are suffering adverse impacts as well as businesses from the unusual economic times that we're in now from the pandemic. That's why I brought this plan as presented, that I think we meet two outstanding concerns that we heard: tax relief and the condition of the town's roadways. So I welcome any thoughts that you may have tonight or Thursday or next week or what have you as we go into town meeting, but that's sort of where I'm at this point.
Any comments? The $600,000 for the PFAS would be that's above and beyond what we took from the FinCom reserve, right, to cover through October. That's to cover the remediation.
This is going forward for the remediation,
My only other comment would just be a consideration on how you view the $1 million in fiscal '23, where it says it would fund 50% phase out of assistance. And I know there are a lot of people that would like us to try to be more sustainable in assisting to reduce the rate of the tax increase. So I think that's just kind of a mindset thing of how we approach that depending on how things are going. But I just wouldn't make an a priori judgment at this point that
what I want to avoid
phase it out.
What I want to avoid is what I inherited when I arrived here 15 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
The town was doing this thing where they were putting money in and out of the stabilization fund,
Right.
and it got to the point where the town's stabilization fund was below the policy and in a level where, in my first month here at the office, I had a visit from the Department of Revenue saying, you've got a financial concern.
Yeah.
Just to put it in perspective, because I know there's an audience here, but just the average single-family tax bill in the community, as I noted in my memo, is $7,411. Every $1 million of free cash or stabilization or other reserves to it is roughly $70, okay? So this year, the $2 million basically reduced on the average single-family home of roughly $500,000, $140. What I also want to point out to folks is you shouldn't expect your tax bill to go down $140 because you're going to have an increase in the 2.5 allowed under the statute because certainly the costs of the community in terms of payroll and health insurance and other costs and inflation are going up. So that has to be borne in mind. So I don't want people saying, well, wait a minute, you told us we'd save $140 off of our current tax bill. That's not going to take place. The other thing that's going on, and we'll hear this from the assessors, I'm sure in several weeks, beginning of November, the shift in property valuations continues to trend towards residential. Obviously, anybody who's paid any attention to the real estate market knows that the residential home values have increased at a greater rate than those of the commercial, industrial, and office market. And so what that means is even if you had the same budget, residential would pay more because of the change in valuation. So I guess we always want to temper our remarks by being precise. The point is we're not telling people that their tax bills are going down. It's mitigating what otherwise would be a larger increase.
Right.
And that's why when you talk about how I phrase it is, if you go all in and then you can't go in, you're going to have a spike even under a normal thing, and that's going to create a lot of heartburn at some point in time. So when we did the $2 million a year ago, we had talked about $1 million this year and step phasing out. So we're sort of pushing that back, but at some point we're going to have to phase out. So that's why I characterize it that way. So thank you for your indulgence with that. And then the last thing I have, and it was, again, goes back to the board's goals, is to select dates for the traffic listening sessions. I will point out to the board that your next 3 Mondays are booked by scheduled select board meetings, the 20th, 27th, and 4th. And then again, the 11th then becomes Columbus Day, and then the 18th is fall annual town meeting. So Monday nights are out, at least through town meeting at this point, which is 5 Mondays. Thursday nights tends to put you into the finance committee territory, at least for the next couple of weeks.
They're planning to vote by the 30th.
Yeah, and I think, what's that?
They're planning to vote by September 30th, and I think we had talked about trying to work in that slower time in the beginning of October, right?
Exactly, that's what I was getting at. I think the time it would be at the beginning of October because you're sort of through the town meeting stuff, but you're not at town meeting, and it is a bit of a break period. So, again, I would think, if you're talking 2 dates, you might want to have one in each of the first 2 weeks of October if the hope would be to get this done, by mid-October.
Yep. So what do folks think?
My suggestion would be go ahead. My suggestion would be Thursday nights because, again, it's not a night that conflicts with the planning board or conservation or board of health. Because FinCom won't be meeting. So my thought would be you might want to look towards like the 7th and the 14th, or if you want to do 7th and 13th, you get it to not have it all both be on the same night or something. But again, I think we stay away from Mondays, and I try to avoid the conflicts with the planning board and such.
Selfishly, I'd prefer the 7th and the 13th because I have a tentative commitment the 14th that I could skip if I had to. But
okay. So the 7th.
What do other people have going on? Ken?
We're doing 2 because one in north and one towards the center.
One for north and one for the rest of town.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not saying for center, but towards the center as far as the location.
Physically holding the meeting, yes.
Yeah, okay. I'm open on all those dates suggested, so.
Would the 7th and the 13th work for people?
That works for me.
Mark?
What start time?
6:30? People
Yeah.
seem to think 6 is too early, but
6:30?
Yeah, so
Okay.
we're already past my bedtime tonight, and we started at
Okay.
6.
All right, so 6:30 on the 7th and the 13th.
So they're going to be at the senior center and at the CCA? Is
Yeah,
that
we can do
correct?
that, CCA, Senior Center and CCA.
How do we notify people?
Yeah, we're gonna send that out somehow.
We'll blast as best we can by website,
Just ask
social
people to
media.
spread the word.
We put it in that little Sun 5-minute thing and do all
We
these
can
types
start
So-
putting them in our announcements at the
Announcements,
beginning of the meeting,
So,
too.
so which is going to be which? Which is going to be first? I mean,
don't
we
care.
should decide that.
I would say do the north one first, if possible, because that seems to be I think you'd want to get ahead of that rather than having that spill into.
I have one other question for the board. So when we did this the first time around, we were able to have the listening session. Vivian was there, and we got like the documentation right away to go back and look at within the next couple weeks. We're going to want somebody to kind of capture what's been said, right? So I don't know if that's, or do we go back and watch it after and do it, or I don't know if we can expect Tricia to do that, or is it minutes? It's not really, it's
Well,
just.
yeah, you do need minutes, but yeah, we did have something else that I think maybe even Ken
Somebody
created
did.
his own spreadsheet of everything that was brought up and what the issue was.
Well, I think.
Okay, we can figure it
Yeah,
out.
what happened the last time we went back through, Mike McCall and I, the video, he did his and I did mine.
Okay,
And we then compared our notes as to what we got out of the video. And then we broke that into a short, mid, and long term. And that's when Paul brought that to the traffic committee to work with it.
okay, so we can do something like that, easy enough.
Okay.
All right,
And I wouldn't mind them seeing it again if you want me to.
okay. Anything else, Paul?
Thank you, and that's my report for this evening.
So we have a meeting minutes next. I have one comment that I didn't catch on the first review, and that is the July 22nd minutes say remote/hybrid meeting. And at that point, we had stopped doing the remote hybrid for open sessions that were just to adjourn to executive session. So we just need to delete that line. There's no recording on Chelmsford Telemedia of that meeting. You know what I mean? Computer just went out. At the top of the, if you're looking in your package, Pat, at the top
yeah.
of
Oh,
July
yeah.
22nd, it says remote/hybrid. It wasn't.
Yeah, I
So-
just was confused because the 22nd comes after the 29th on my
So,
packet here.
so I'm just suggesting, yeah, because that's June 29th, and this is July
right.
22nd. So I'm just suggesting that on July 22nd, we strike that line when we approve these.
So we're going to do all edits before, and then approve them all at once? Because
Yeah.
I just have one thing on the June 7th.
You know, it would have helped if we got these back to Christina ahead of time.
I
No, know you
noticed
didn't,
it over
but
the
it sounds like there's
weekend.
more
I
now,
said, I
too.
apologize, I missed it.
Well, no, it's just a minor formatting thing. On page 7 of the June 7th, it just, the bullet point, it looks like there's just some issue maybe with the tabbing.
Oh, yeah, I noticed that. I wasn't
Yeah,
going to worry
so
about it.
that's what, yeah, well, I think it, she probably would correct it anyway
Yeah,
without us saying anything, but
okay.
that was all I had. So do you want to do just one motion?
That's fine with me.
Okay, I'll make a motion to approve Select Board open meeting minutes for May 15th, 2021, May 25th, 2021, June 1st, 2021, June 7th, 2021, June 14th, 2021, June 28th, 2021, June 29th, 2021, and July 22nd, 2021.
And you said you said May 15th, it's May 17th.
Oh, okay. I'll amend my motion to May 17th. I'm not going to read them all again.
Okay.
And do we want to mention what that edit?
As amended?
Removing the remote hybrid meeting annotation on July 22nd.
Right. Okay. I'll second that motion.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Ken?
Aye.
5-0. Okay, we're at liaison reports and referrals. Pat?
Yeah, just a couple of quick things. Today, the library started with curbside pickup at McKay Library in North Chelmsford, so if you want a book, you can just let the library know, and it'll be available for you to be picked up at McKay. Definitely check with the library, because it's only certain days and certain times, so anyway, but it is available. And just a note about the Chelmsford Friends of the Library. We'll not be having a big indoor book sale this year, but they are trying to plan for an outside, smaller book sale sometime in October, so stay tuned, and hopefully we'll get that done. And the only other thing is, want to thank the firefighters for the 9/11 ceremony that they conducted last Saturday here. It was very well done. It definitely showed the sense of what happened that day, and I'm glad that we get something like that to reflect on at least once a year.
Thank you, Pat. George?
All set.
What? Ken?
I'm all set.
Okay. I just have a couple things. The Board of Health would like to announce that it will be holding public flu clinics. The first one is scheduled for Wednesday, October 13th at the Senior Center from 3:30 p.m. to 7 p.m., with 3:30 to 4:30 being designated for those 65 years or older. And the high-dose flu vaccine is available for those over 65. The age range for public flu clinics is 19 years and older this year, because the town did not receive a supply of state vaccine to vaccinate those 18 and younger, and the Board of Health is still working on trying to obtain that. Online pre-registration is required. The registration link will be posted on the Board of Health website on Tuesday, September 21st, and the Board of Health is collaborating with the Council on Aging to develop a plan to assist those who are unable to pre-register on their own. And then for the Planning Board, on September 22nd, the Planning Board will continue its public hearing for the purposes of receiving public comment to amend the Town Code Chapter 195 zoning bylaw, Chapter 202 subdivision of land, and related regulations and procedures. And these are proposed changes that amend existing provisions and add new provisions related to stormwater and low-impact development standards. And that's all I have. I don't see any press, so with that, I'll take a motion.
I'll make a motion that we adjourn to executive session, not to return to open session, for the purpose of discussing strategy with respect to litigation, specifically the opioid class action litigation.
I second the motion.
We have a motion and a second. Pat?
Aye.
George? Mark?
Aye.
Ken? Ken? You're muted, Ken.
Sorry, on my screen it doesn't say muted. Aye.
And I vote aye. Thank you.
Do we want to have Ken join us on a cell phone?